Hey there. Tonight we're slipping behind a fake bakery door to explore why you wouldn't last a day in a 1920s speakeasy. Not the Hollywood version, you know. Passwords changed nightly. Quiet bribes kept the band playing, and the gin wasn't always safe. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You roll out of bed into a world that swears it doesn't drink. The law says the party ended in January 1920 when the 18th Amendment kicked in, and the Volstead Act defined anything above 0.5% alcohol as contraband. Officially, the taps went dry. Unofficially, the city learned to whisper. Your whole day is about to revolve around that whisper. You want a speakeasy tonight. You want jazz, clinking glasses, and illegal fizz. You want the myth. The reality answers with coal smoke in your nose. A network of lookouts, a police force playing both sides, and drinks that can blind you. The Roaring Twenties earned its volume from the clash between law and demand. That volume nicks your nerves before lunch. Morning smacks you with the fake quiet of prohibition. A decade earlier, the early commute smelled like beer delivery and stale ale dripping from sidewalks. Now it smells like gasoline, streetcar grease, and something medicinal coming from a back doorway that pretends to be a soda parlor. The official story says Americans sobered up. The measurable data complicates it. Arrests for public drunkenness plunged in the early 1920s, and per capita alcohol consumption dropped at first. But by the middle of the decade, consumption had crept back, up through black market channels. Historians like Daniel O'Krent put the change in stark terms. The thirst never left. It just moved. New York, where your evening target hides, repealed its own enforcement law in 1923 under Governor Al Smith. That means by today, the only people really trying to make the city dry are overstretched federal agents and a handful of local moral crusaders. They are outnumbered and outbribed. The Wickersham Commission in 1931 would call this experiment unenforceable in its current form. You feel that unenforceability in how many addresses get whispered around a barber chair or scribbled on a matchbook. Your daylight hours become logistics. A speakeasy is not a bar with a neon sign. It is a whispered map of a door, a name you drop, and a system that does not trust you. The most repeated claim says New York City held as many as 32,000 speakeasies by 1929, a number that gets quoted in newspapers and memoirs. Police and politicians tossed out counts ranging from 20,000 to 100 to 100,000 because no one could keep up. The exact tally matters less than the infrastructure behind it. An average night in Manhattan involves thousands of illegal rooms pouring drinks, while the legal economy nods along and pretends the piano in the back is for decor. Here is how your day builds toward that piano. You start with the source. Legal. Alcohol has 3 doors: sacramental, medicinal, and industrial. Sacramental wine keeps churches stocked with communion. Medicinal whiskey keeps doctors and pharmacists busy with government-issued prescription blanks. Treasury Form 1403. The law says a patient can get 1 pint of 100 proof liquor every 10 days for medical need, tightened by the Willis-Campbell Act in 1921. Estimates advertised at the time claimed as many as 11 million prescriptions for liquor were written in 1921 alone. According to newspaper tallies and later historians, industrial alcohol sits in factories for paints and fuels, denatured with poison, so people won't drink it. They drink it anyway, after bootleg chemists attempt to reprocess it. That last door kills people. You would not last long in this supply chain. It runs fast. Boats, bribes, and chemistry on deadlines. Out at sea, the black market lazes just past the 3-mile limit on Rum Row from Montauk to New Jersey. Schooners anchored with Bahamian or Canadian papers sell cases of bonded whiskey and real scotch to smaller speedboats that dart toward shore. Captain Bill McCoy made a name on this setup, refusing to water down his cargo, which birthed the phrase the real McCoy. He was an exception worth advertising. Most of the time you get cut product, redistilled product, or something that wishes it were product. Warehouse theft, siphons industrial alcohol, and bootleggers try to erase the denaturants. The federal government, convinced that poisoning the supply will end the party, orders stronger denaturing formulas mid-decade, upping methanol and other toxins. The result is grim. Journalist Deborah Blum, digging through medical examiner files, estimates that by the end of Prohibition, more than 10,000 deaths tied to tainted alcohol occurred. New York City's own medical examiner, Charles Norris, documented spikes around Christmas and New Year's as people hit toxic batches. You fact-check that claim with the smell in the air from a backroom still. Harsh, solventy, and cooked too fast. You spend your late morning, not with gangsters, but with infrastructure. Every step requires a helper. You need a name to even try a door tonight. Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith, 2 federal agents who became folk heroes, proved how easy it is to turn a password into a trap. Between 1920 and 1925, they made roughly 4,932 arrests, often by walking into a joint in costume and asking for a drink anyway. They boasted conviction rates over 90%. They got canned in 1925 because their publicity put the Bureau in an awkward light. Their success tells you speakeasies do not behave like spy movies. Some use passwords, but a great number keep their doors open to regulars and the convincingly thirsty. Many stash their booze behind sham walls or in cisterns. A landmark joint like the 21 Club would install a system of camouflaged shells that flipped bottles into a secret chute and a wine cellar behind a hidden door disguised as a brick. Or those tricks belong to the big-name rooms. On the average block, the trick looks like a buzzer and a doorman who sizes up your shoes. The password cliché still circulates. Phrases like Joe sent me appear in cartoons and comedies of the day because they get laughs. Your actual access arrives from the kind of favor that can be revoked. In a city as wired up as 1920s Manhattan, one gossip chain moves like radio. You walk past storefronts advertising cigars and sarsaparilla. You mark the physical cues. Frosted windows, 2 buzzers instead of 1, and a clerk who never looks up. If you look like law, no one meets your eyes. If you look like money, someone coughs the name of a place that looks like a tailor shop. Lunch shows you why. Night drives the myth. Daytime wetness is a different flavor. Soft drink parlors sell Pilsner glasses of near beer and something under the counter for a loyal friend. That friend faces real penalties on paper. The Volstead Act allows fines of up to $1,000 and 6 months in jail for a first offense of selling. It also allows the padlocking of premises for a year through federal injunction as a public nuisance. In practice, bribery and case backlogs soften those penalties. The police play a delicate game. Newspapers like the New York World and the New York Times report raids when they happen, but they also report policemen tipped off in advance. Or padlocked doors with the same place reopened a week later under a new name. The courtroom tells you even more. Jurors sometimes refuse to convict because their aunts keep wine for Passover or their doctors keep whiskey for winter colds. The law collides with daily habits and loses in 100 small ways. You hear a jazz lick from a window, and it is not the Charleston from a cartoon. The 1920s club playlist is a stew. Popular songs from Tin Pan Alley, hot jazz filtered through Broadway, and blues lines from up the Harlem grid. The Cotton Club, up on 142nd Street, and Lenox, opens in 1923. Run by gangster Auni Madden, with a whites-only customer policy, while black musicians headline the stage. Duke Ellington builds a national reputation. There, the drink flows because the owner buys the cops. This city is a map of segregated pleasure. Harlem rent parties raise cash for tenants by selling a night of music and bathtub gin in apartments. Downtown, cabarets call themselves tea rooms. While they load the teapot, the drinkers skew younger and more gender-mixed than the pre-war saloon crowd. Women walk in with bobbed hair and smoke in public. Cigarette companies push the trend, and by the mid-1920s, women smokers become a visible normal. You feel your eyes sting. Ventilation rarely wins against coal-fired heating and crowded rooms. You spend early afternoon preparing your modern body for a 1920s drink. The palate needs a warning. The phrase bathtub gin does not mean someone literally distilled gin in a bathtub. It means the batches were compounded in homes and basements, cut to volume with water from a tap, and spiked with flavorings from oil of juniper to glycerin elixirs. That gin performs like a prank. Cocktails become camouflage. The bee's knees with lemon and honey, the gin ricky with lime and soda, and the south side with mint show up in countless accounts for a reason. They mask the taste. They also slide down quickly, which means you take in more ethanol and methanol than you think. Straight rye or scotch remains around if you pay for the good stuff, and if your source truly got it off a bonded cargo or a pre-prohibition stock. Pre-prohibition. Liquor was a gold mine for bootleggers. Families sold off old cellars at enormous markups. Warehouse break-ins fed caches of real product to select clientele. Most people get something that calls itself by a famous brand name, but left a kettle that morning. Your pockets need adaptation. Flasks become a fashion accessory. Hip flasks curve to your body under coats. Some people use hollowed-out books. Garters carry slim flasks that fit under a hem. Couture keeps up. Hemlines move upward by the mid-1920s in a visible cultural shift. A 1926 skirt kisses the knee, cloaked by a drop waist silhouette, leaving room to dance with a hidden bottle. The club dress code reads, "No one's rules except the door's," and the door cares about whether you bring attention and whether you pay. The upper-tier joints that pretend to be legitimate restaurants enforce jackets, ties, and table service. The neighborhood rooms enforce regularity and either cash on the table or familiarity with the house manager. You prepare cash because cards and checks mean names on paper. Now, the part your modern gut underestimates. The health risk runs like a silent partner to the soundtrack. Industrial alcohol that has been redistilled of impurities can still carry fusel oils and traces that wreck livers and optic nerves. Poison pioneers, like methyl alcohol and methylated spirits, pass batch to batch to batch because the bootleg chemist cannot undo every reagent. The federal denaturing formulas list dozens of chemicals, among them pyridine and benzene and some mixtures that cause vomiting, acidosis, coma, and death in the right dose. New York City emergency rooms keep charcoal handy, and the morgue keeps numbers. Newspaper headlines through the decade tally bodies found on sidewalks after a bad pour. Even in the years after this day, The Jamaican ginger extract paralysis outbreak called Jake Leg, which peaks around 1930, shows the scale of risk in adulterated pseudo-liquor. The ginger extract case belongs slightly later, but the pattern belongs now. You want that bee's knees, because your nose wants cover. By mid-afternoon, your ears catch the political soundtrack. It matters for the door you will knock tonight. Mayor James J. Walker sits in City Hall, a Tammany Hall politician who treats prohibition like a joke. He cracks wise about how many liquor prescriptions a person can need, and his administration tolerates the city's parlor geography. Enforcement remains a federal gig, and the federal gig struggles. In 1925, the entire country has about 1,500 federal prohibition agents on paper at any point. By 1930, that number rises to roughly 2,800. Put that against a nation of more than 120 million people, and the ratio turns symbolic. The agents who do work hard face low pay, threats, and offers they are not supposed to take. Corruption becomes a default. Courts clog with cases and plea deals. The long-run report card, delivered by the Wickersham Commission, calls out underfunding, public cynicism, and a theatre of enforcement that has everyone exhausted. You pack aspirin and ready your act for evening. The myth about speakeasies says they were all glamorous dens with jazz on cue and witty toasts. The truth says the quality spectrum is enormous. On the lower end, you find sweating rooms with sawdust on the floor. On the higher end, you get a gleaming Art Deco room with a foie gras course and a sommelier who speaks in code. One of the city's famed night spots, later memorialized as the 21 Club, kept its cellars behind booby-trapped mechanisms, so thoroughly engineered that renovation crews decades later still found hideaways. Auni Madden's Cotton Club pours champagne at high prices, while outside the door, police patrols take their orders from the same network that owns the club. In between, downtown tea rooms host tables of secretaries and reporters drinking tall gin drinks while telling the boss it is ginger ale. The city is wet by habit. That habit becomes the stage for your survival test. Dusk pulls you toward a doorway that pretends to be something else. A few things you think you know peel away under your fingers. Not every joint uses a password. For many rooms, the code is a knock, a pause, the slide of a peephole cover, and the invisible judgment of the doorman when he sees the angle of your hat. Phones matter more than passwords. You call the number on a book of matches, a number that rotates and that someone passed to you with a look last week. The person on the other end tells you a time and asks who you know. That reference gets verified by a runner, peeking out the upstairs window right now at your face. The runner looks for two things: whether a known regular stands behind you and whether you look law. The tell used to be the shoes. Policemen got discounted shoes from certain union-friendly manufacturers. That old trick grows obvious over the decade. So now it becomes the haircut, the hat crease, or whether you walk alone. You stand at the wrong angle, and the peephole stays shut. The door opens, because the city prefers money. You step into a room that took the word beverage off the menu and replaced it with wink-wink categories. Coffee service becomes the cover. The waiters call Martine's cold coffee, or one of a dozen other jokes, and put the glass inside a teacup if the neighborhood noise gets too loud. In New York, a padlock raid often starts with a neighbor's complaint about noise. The federal agents still require evidence of liquor sales to win in court. Cups with colored tea, a quick dump into a sink when the buzzer sounds, a back exit for regulars, and a fake kitchen that fills the room with legitimate grilled onions become the defensive playbook. The 21 Club and other high-end restaurants go for technological cover. Lever systems drop shelves into shafts behind walls. Bottles disappear in seconds. If the law still finds the cellar, it has to find it behind a door that looks like brick. The hotel bars that pretend not to be bars run money straight to the manager's pocket for insurance in case of raids. You do not get a receipt. The drink lands and your tongue clocks it. If it is a sidecar made with cognac smuggled from Europe, the flavor comes close to a real recipe. If it is a gin Ricky built on homemade gin, the lime and fizz lunge forward aggressively to hide the base. Cider and beer hum quietly from barrels if you find an operation that kept its brewery tooling. Many old breweries try to survive by making near beer and shipping real beer under false labels. The Volstead Act 0.5% cutoff means even near beer sits under suspicion when the wrong inspector shows up. In 1921, Herbert Hoover called Prohibition a great social and economic experiment, noble in motive. By now, on the floor under your shoes, it qualifies as noble chaos. The room's energy runs on risk. That energy has pulled you in since morning. It also shreds your nerves. The culture sells this time as flappers and Charleston steps. Those are real slices, but the background hum includes stick-ups at back doors, hijacked liquor trucks, and territorial violence over who controls what block. In Chicago, Al Capone's organization reportedly grossed tens of millions a year from illegal alcohol by the late 1920s, with often quoted figures around $60 million. New York syndicates build wealth and political muscle through clubs and warehouses instead of showy massacres. Arnold Rothschild plays the financier role until his 1928 murder. The city's underworld cements alliances that reshape organized crime long after the dry laws end. Tonight's glass of gin slides across that web. You stand in a room that can vanish in 2 minutes because everyone rehearsed it. The signal differs place to place. Some rooms wire a bell to the front door or mount a mirror to catch the reflection of the street. Others keep a kid posted outside with a newspaper and a mission. The mission says blow a whistle if the wrong car stops or a too clean man lingers. The kid stands between your evening and the kind of memory that starts with a siren and ends with a judge. Federal agents write in their memoirs about how often they got tipped off before an operation even began. Newspapers print photographs of padlocks on tavern doors within days, but also photographs of those padlocks cut off with a saw the next week. Law enforcement builds many files and few permanent closures. Own the right building and change the lease. Name. Open 3 blocks over. Move the band. Your tolerance takes a hit from the era's chemistry. Drinks in this room can run stronger and cruder than your 21st century bar. Standard because distillation quality runs on speed and volume here. Cocktails enter the mainstream for survival rather than art. Recipe books begin to formalize what gets poured. A 1922 manual like Harry Macalone's. Harry's ABC of mixing cocktails catalogues recipes that feel classic now, but were born of immediacy then. Honey and citrus blend with industrial spirits to make something that tastes like rebellion and medicine at once. You sip it because it promises a mood. That mood hides a kick that betrays you after 2 glasses. You cannot Uber home in 1926. Taxis exist, but drivers fear random stops that cost them their night if caught near a known wet block. Walking becomes your default, and you dress shoes for long miles because subways miss the neighborhood you stumbled into at 1 a.m. Your modern lungs complain. Smoking saturates these rooms. Clubs hand out ashtrays the way. Cafes hand out sugar packets. By the mid-1920s, the tobacco habit has gone mass market, and the glow of a cigarette becomes part of the club's visual language. Health warnings have not entered popular discourse in the way they will by mid-century. You cough lightly and joke about smog to someone who was born inhaling coal smoke and street grit. The sarcasm lands. Everyone in this room participates in the myth that all this will make a great memoir one day. Enough people die for the morgue to write statistics. Enough people adapt that the stats also show adaptation. The human liver lacks nostalgia. Shifts in gender and class norms shape your night as much as the drinks. Pre-prohibition, saloons famously excluded women, except those working as entertainers or in roles that nudged against sex work. Speakeasies blow that wall open. Women walk into public, mixed company drinking rooms. The visual of a woman with a bob, bare knees for the first time in mainstream urban memory, and a cocktail glass in hand scares temperance leaders and thrills at men. The American Medical Association movement that once declared alcohol of dwindling therapeutic value pivot around the money of prescriptions. The hypocrisy hangs in the air like smoke. The live band plays a foxtrot. Your mind flashes to a headline from a 1921 paper. Congressman caught with liquor. That double standard never loosens its tie. Your modern immune system readies a warning. Glass sanitation in this room meets the bar set by the era. That bar sits low. Dishwashing machines exist, but do not dominate. Rushed rinses in lukewarm water pass as cleaning in some joints. Straight-edge razors in barbershops touch many faces per day. Germ theory holds in polite society but stumbles under the speed of nightlife. Spittoons still sit in some corners of the city. Club toilets can be afterthoughts in buildings never designed for hundreds of people. Drinking illegal liquid at midnight. Food poisoning stories run through the gossip chain. The decadent clubs at least hire real cooks. The corner joints push sandwiches that land like a dare. You either plate and keep your energy on the bread, then the thing your head rehearsed all day spreads through the room like a weather front. The temperature changes. The piano falls quiet first, because the man at the keys sees something you don't. The door staff becomes the only show you can hear. A quick code word skips across the room, or a light bulb at the front desk flickers in a pattern you do not recognize, until the waiter starts clearing cups with urgent elegance. The smell of gin floods the air, sudden and clean, as if a dozen bottles hit a sink at once. The couples at the back table turn toward a coil curtain you had not noticed hiding a narrow staircase. This choreography earned its muscle memory, because raids happen frequently enough to drill. Newspaper reports in the 1920s speak of dozens of raids in a week in certain boroughs, sometimes hundreds over a season. You stand there thinking you can act calm. Your body chooses adrenaline. The legal risk vector is not a Hollywood Tommy gun scene most nights. It is paperwork and humiliation. Agents line people up, demand identification, look for proof of a sale, and seize evidence. They confiscate kegs, bottles, and cash in registers. They count the number of patrons and write it up for a nuisance suit. The Volstead Act authorizes property seizure for vehicles and boats used to carry liquor. Cars get impounded. In big sweeps, the press shows up to photograph respectable men and women looking at their shoes as they exit through a row of uniforms. Those photos sell papers. They also make voters angry. Jury nullification becomes a low hum in this system. In many jurisdictions, jurors refuse to convict on technical bars to the law. Prosecutors adapt by focusing charges higher up the chain or by targeting proprietors instead of patrons. Patrons still end up with fines and arrest records. The wrong judge can make a lesson of a case by imposing the full 6 months. You begin to calculate bail money without your phone. The club's countermeasures kick in. The front of house covers the contraband and shifts all public language to soda fountain terms. Soda permits, give a veneer of legitimacy. The kitchen cranks up onions because onions cover spirits better than perfume. Out the back staircase, a few favoured regulars slip into an alleyway that has never been on a tourist map. In a place like the 21 Club, the system goes architectural. In a neighbourhood storefront, the system goes improvisational. None of this qualifies as fictional flourish. It reads like dozens of contemporaneous accounts from raids reported in metropolitan dailies and in memoirs from both sides of the law. The scavenger dance of evidence disposal becomes a local tradition. Your heart rate becomes your souvenir. You stand within a social hypocrisy that feels so thick it reflects light. The men and women in this room include bankers, politicians, aides, and sports writers. They show up again in the papers later as condo donors and board members at museums. They spend on contraband like it is a subscription fee for an outlaw membership. Dry leaders gave this era a nickname. The noble experiment is what they called it. The experiment looks like this face right now, flushed from a gin drink your great-grandparents would not recognize. The grift that supports the room you're in funds the next election cycle. That is not a revelation from an edgy documentary. It is the subtext of city politics. For a decade, the Wickersham Commission would write that public opinion on prohibition remains deeply divided and that the law brought on widespread disrespect for legal institutions. Your drink tastes like that sentence. You find your way back outside because the adrenaline finally tells your legs to go. The door closes behind you fast. Outside, on the sidewalk, the city sounds different than it did at noon. It sounds like engines and laughter that tries too hard. It smells like someone poured a case of gin into a gutter, and you start to wonder. A newspaper boy shouts a headline. The headline likely yokes corruption and glamour. A celebrity actor caught in a raid, a magistrate criticized for leniency, a charity ball's secret drinks rumored in a gossip column. These collisions rhythm the decade. You walk down a street where many address numbers hide a bottle tonight. In a handful of apartments upstairs, tenants host rent parties, raising cash for the month and feeding a cultural renaissance. Langston Hughes writes a poem that fits the mood of the room you just left better than any legal brief. Culture hitches a ride on a law dodge. Your modern body wants a nightcap. In this decade, the nightcap has a price measured in biological stress. Even good whiskey served out of a reused medicine bottle hits different after hours of smoke and nerves. Your liver handles a different set of impurities tonight than it does in your century. Your ears sting from music that recorded onto acoustic discs or onto the first electric microphones earlier this decade and plays back like a modern earworm with a scrambled bite. The word hangover meant one thing to your age this morning. It means something else now, after a day of illegal logistics. Tomorrow arrives with a head that punishes your daring and with a tongue that tastes like the inside of a contraband barrel. The day ends with you promising caution. The city laughs because promises in this city wear out by brunch. You would not last a day in this world without breaking the rules or breaking yourself. You face a legal landscape that criminalizes routine, social behavior, and a marketplace that solves that criminalization with risk. You bet tonight on a bartender who can distinguish drinkable redistilled alcohol from poison. You bet on a doorman who recognizes you and a lookout who is awake at the right moment. You bet on a taxi driver who knows when to accelerate and when to turn left. You bet on a judge who hates paperwork. You bet on the human desire to belong to something secret and on the economy that thrives on that desire. The record shows how this movie ends. By 1933, it collapses. Franklin D. Roosevelt signs the Cullen-Harrison Act in March of that year, legalizing 3.2% beer and light wine, and the 21st Amendment repeals national prohibition by December. New York City drinks in the open and installs a taxman between your glass and the sink. The marvel of the flipped bottle becomes public bragging instead of private magic. The machinery behind tonight's room starts laundering itself into the legitimate beverage industry, into unions, into entertainment conglomerates, and into political machines that rebrand and never disappear. You retrace your morning with a sharper eye. The city that spent a decade drinking illegally also taught itself to brand cool. The speakeasy myth survives a century and spawns theme bars with dim light and expensive cocktails. Passwords get printed on websites. Drinks land in meticulously chilled coupes, made with spirits clean enough to register only as joy on your tongue. Those places build a set design from the memory of the show you just walked through in an illegal copy. The difference sits in your throat. Tonight, real risk caught in your esophagus when the band fell quiet. Tonight did not belong to a themed garnish. It belonged to a ledger of names in a back office that someone is ready to burn. Every number you touch today belonged to a documented world. Federal agents in the low thousands, raids in the dozens per week in a dryly policed borough, dozens of deaths when a poison batch hit a city, a prescription system with millions of slips signed, a glamour statistic about 32,000 speakeasies in the city, echoed in the papers because it sounded good and felt true, regardless of how round the number might be. The main fact, repeated all day, pressed against your ribs. This era did not separate people into sinners and saints. It sorted them into those who accepted the trade-offs and those who did not. You accepted the trade-offs for one long day. Your nerves took the receipt. By the time you hit your pillow, your modern brain knows exactly why history books quote the Wickersham Commission's final sigh about unenforceability and why Daniel O'Krent's title, Last Call, feels like a wink. The experiment built a world that could never make peace with the way people live. It created the speakeasy, which created you tonight. And then it ended because the math refused to bend further. Your day consisted of mistrust at the door, chemicals in the glass, conspiracies on the curb, and a band that understood danger better than you. You would not last because the cost of fitting in here is omnipresent stress and a willingness to rationalize poison. You take off your shoes and your optimism with them. Tomorrow will arrive with newspapers detailing raids and politicians promising cleanups. The same papers will advertise cabarets where you can come dance Thursday. The lines between content and advertorial will fuzz. This city in the 1920s is a masterclass in compartmentalization. The prohibitionist gaze looks at you from a poster. The speakeasy gaze looks at you from a peephole. Your own reflection looks at you from the bottom of a glass with a soft honey ring at its meniscus. That glass carries similar sugar to the sugar counted by inspectors when trying to prove a restaurant sells syrup suspiciously out of proportion to its menu. The accountants built cases from syrup purchases. The bartenders built recipes to bury a flavor. You built an alibi. Evening ends not with a toast, but with a truth. The modern version of you prefers clean drink, honest signage, and exits that open onto legal sidewalks. The 1920s version of you moved through a choreography improvised by necessity and audacity. You lasted the day because you sampled the myth, dodged the worst outcomes by luck, and kept your head down when the room changed temperature. 100,000 others did the same dance every night in this city. Many lived to tell it with a grin. Many did not. The history reads dashing and dangerous because it was, and because it paid well for the right people. The last sensory note in your memory as you fall asleep is not the juniper or the cigarette. It is the silence that fell just before someone moved toward the sink. That silence is the most accurate sound of the era. It tells you everything necessary about why the social experiment lost, and about why you, with your very modern sense of safety, would not last a day without flinching. Next, let's turn our attention to the life of Alfred the Great, defender of England. A king is hiding in a swamp. In January 878, after a sudden Danish strike on Chippenham during the Christmas season, Alfred of Wessex is down to a handful of followers in the marshes of Somerset. No banners, no war trumpet, just reed beds, mud, a makeshift fort on a low island called Athelney, and a whole lot of silence, punctured by the sound of waterfowl and the occasional curse. When a man misjudges the depth of a bog, this is the man later called the Great. Right now, he looks very much not great. He is also accused, famously, of burning some cakes. That story gets all the attention. It's cinematic and deliciously petty. A starving king, disguised and desperate, supposedly lets a peasant woman's loaves scorch while he daydreams about taking back his kingdom. It sticks because it makes him human. The catch is that the earliest version of the burned cake's tale shows up not in his 9th century biographer Asa, but in a later 12th century life of Saint Neot. It is folklore, with good pry. Still, the image fits the setting too well to die. A king in a bog, destiny on low heat, something smoking in the background. But this marsh scene only makes sense if the biography behind it gets built, piece by piece, like Alfred himself rebuilt England, methodically, strategically, and with more patience than his enemies thought possible. He arrived on the historical stage in 848, or 848, or 849, at Wantage in Berkshire, the 5th son of King Athelwulf of Wessex and his Queen Osber. 5th sons do not usually end up with crowns. 5th sons make good spares and great diplomats. Asa, writing in 893, describes a boy who loved listening to heroic poetry before he could read it, a little prince who hugged stories to his chest by contraband while older brothers did the traditional royal thing with swords and charters. By age 4 or 5, Asa puts it at 853, he was on the road to Rome with royal escorts and a pedigree heavy enough to get past every gatekeeper in Christendom. Pope Leo, I fist, anointed him there. Modern historians do not buy that as a literal coronation, more a papal blessing for a small VIP whose father gave generous gifts and valued continental connections. Still, the symbolism mattered. He returned to Rome again around 855 with his father, who famously stayed for a year, proving Wessex kings could think beyond coastal raiding and local crisis. Back home, politics throbbed like a background bassline. Athelwulf died in 858. Then came a carousel of brothers, Athelbald, and Athelbald, ruling in turn. This had a bonus effect. Alfred learned statecraft without the burden of top billing. He sat in councils, he negotiated, he learned what it meant to hold a frontier against men in longships who didn't bother with polite pre-announcements. He also learned pain. Asa says he suffered a mysterious chronic illness from young adulthood. Onward worsened around his wedding in 868 to Ealhswith of Mercia. Asa's Latin uses the word ficus, which usually means hemorrhoids, but scholars have lobbed diagnoses across the centuries. Crohn's disease, ibis, gallstones, or something autoimmune. The important point is grimmer and simpler. Alfred reigned in constant discomfort for decades. and still built systems that outlived him. Marriage pulled Wessex and Mercia into a closer embrace. Practical, because Mercia had been kneecapped by Viking pressure for years. In 865, a large coalition, often called the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia. Not a hit-and-run raid, occupation scale, army with families, winter camps, and the kind of confidence that turns maps into checklists. They took York in 866. Northumbria fell into their meat grinder of rival claimants and puppet kings. By 871, Viking forces were steaming into Wessex. That year was remembered as the year of battles. In January, a Viking force occupied Reading in Berkshire. King Athelred and Alfred attacked. The first clash at Reading went badly for Wessex. The enemy held the watercourses and the fort. 4 days later, around the 8th of January, 871, Wessex struck at Ashdown. Asser's version is deliciously pointed. Athelred insisted on finishing mass before entering the fight, while Alfred, junior but unwilling to watch the advantage slip, launched the attack. The West Saxon shield wall hit like a door slammed in a gale. They won. The sons of Ragnar, leaders like Ubba and Halfdan, were terrifying names, but mortality was an equal opportunity. Employer. Reading stayed hostile. Basing later that month was a loss. Meriton, Martin, around March, also a defeat. Then, in April, 800, Hein, on Sipzig, Athelred died. Alfred took the throne around the age of 21. He lasted 2 weeks before another major fight. At Wilton, in early May, his army attacked Vikings who'd taken the town. Again, early success twisted into late reversal. Alfred paid for peace, a survival tactic, not a surrender of intent. Wessex bought breathing space, and the Danes shifted toward London, and then to other targets. This is the part of the legend that usually gets skipped, the years of building while everyone else mocks the guy for paying off invaders. The receipts come later. He married in 868, as noted, and soon had children who mattered to history almost as much as he did. Edward, born c. 804 on Sipzig, who would be called the Elder, and Ethelflad, born c. 870, who would become Lady of the Mercians, and later take Derby and Leicester. Also Alfred, who married Baldwin, II of Flanders, connecting Wessex to continental power networks that mattered when ships started appearing on horizons with suspicious regularity. The transformation of Alfred into the Great runs through 878. The Vikings, led by a king known to the English as Guthrum, launched a surprise winter attack on Chippenham, traditionally dated to Twelfth Night, the 6th of January. Alfred and the court fled. This is the swamp story. He retreated into the Somerset Levels, a watery labyrinth. There, on Athelney, he built a small fort, Athelney's name itself. Old English for Prince's Island, felt pointed. From there, over several months, he used waterways and causeways to harass supply lines, gather intelligence, keep contact with loyalists. Archaeology has found traces of a causeway linking Athelney to the nearby settlement of East Ling. This is not a fantasy swamp kingdom. It's a strategic hideout, placed like a cork in a bottle. The burnt cake's tail attaches to this winter-spring moment. It has all the right props: hunger, humiliation, and a rebuke from an ordinary woman who didn't know her guest was a king. It survives because later monks understood what the audience craves. A leader who tastes defeat and gets scolded in a kitchen before he wins in the field. The historical record has no contemporary mention of the incident. The story is later and morally handy. It spread anyway, the way all great prayer does. because it says something emotionally true. Alfred learned in fire and smoke. By early May 878, Alfred sent messengers. He summoned the West Saxon Fyrd, the part-time militia of free men, and ordered a rendezvous at Egbert's Stone, probably near Kingston Deverill in Wiltshire. It sounds like a Lord of the Rings set piece. It was nastier and much more compact. 3 days later, they marched to Eddington, Ifandun. There, Alfred's army faced Guthrum's. The West Saxons formed ranks with shields locked. The Dane army, veterans of dozens of engagements, surged. The push and counter-push lasted hours. At last, the Viking line buckled. Alfred followed with a siege at Chippenham, cutting off Guthrum's camp until supply ran out. After roughly 2 weeks, Guthrum sued for peace. The conversion of Guthrum was part statesmanship, part stagecraft, and all very practical. He took baptism at Ella, near Athelney. Alfred stood as sponsor and gave him the Christian name Aethelstan. The symbolism was layered. A powerful pagan enemy remade into a godfathered ally. Then came the famous treaty, later known from a text preserved as the Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum, usually dated a few years after the battle. C. 886, 890. It set boundaries that would define headlines for generations. A line along the Thames, up the Lear to Bedford, along the Great Ouse, and roughly along Watling Street became a frontier between English-ruled territory in the southwest and a swath of Danish-controlled country to the northeast. The Danelaw. Trade, legal compensation levels, wergild, and oaths across that border got spelled out with cold arithmetic clarity. This is the opposite of romantic destiny. It's public policy that works. In 1886, Alfred moved to restore London. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says he restored and handed it over to Arthald, his Mercian ally and son-in-law, while claiming the loyalty of all the English people that were not under subjection to the Danes. This was not a con job. Coins from the late 800 and S with the Londonia monogram mark a coherent minting policy. Edward and Arthur were trusted lieutenants. The king and his team were refitting the skeleton of a state. The most Instagrammable artifact of this cultural reboot was made around this time. A small, exquisite object found in 1693 near Athelney, with elegant Anglo-Saxon filigree and a rock crystal window over enamel depicting a figure, likely wisdom or Christ, pointing with a rod. Around the rim, in Old English letters, it says, Alfred mech het geverken. Alfred ordered me made. The Alfred jewel, now in Oxford's Ashmolean Museum, probably served as an estelle, a pointer used to guide the eyes along lines of a manuscript. In the preface to his translation of Pope Gregory's Pastoral Care, Alfred announced a policy to send a copy to every bishop in his kingdom with a valuable estelle attached, valued at 50 mancuses of gold. A mancus was about 4.25 grams. 50 equals roughly 212.5 grams of gold. A flex disguised as a reading aid. This fits Alfred's midlife obsession. Learning. Asser says Alfred couldn't read until about age 12, which only made him hungrier. In the 880s and 890s, he launched what historians sometimes call the Alfredian Renaissance. He recruited scholars from across Britain and the continent, Grimbald from St. Bertin in Flanders, John the Old Saxon from the German regions, Plegmund, who later became Archbishop of Canterbury in 890, and Asser himself from Wales. With their help, he pushed a program to translate essential Latin works into Old English so that, in his famous policy statement, all the freeborn youth of England who have the means, would be taught to read English first and Latin as a next step for those advancing to holy orders or administration. The king himself translated or supervised translations. Gregory's pastoral care, Boethius's consolation of philosophy, with some Alfred-flavoured interpretive expansions, Augustine's soliloquies, and Orosius's history against the pagans. He may have initiated the translation of Bede's ecclesiastical history and set in motion the regularized annals that we call the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Pictures form from little things. Esser loved to mention that Alfred would keep a small book of psalms and prayers tucked into his clothing when he went out hunting. He also timed his day with candles. Seriously, he had 6 candles made to a standard size, each marked and supposed to burn for 4 hours. Wind ruined the math. So he invented a protective lantern made with thin, transparent sheets of horn, basically an early storm lamp, so the flame would survive drafts in church or palace. Medieval innovation sometimes looks humble. It also works, but the part that became terrifying to Alfred's enemies wasn't the reading program or the book pointer jewelry. It was cement and timber. He built a defensive network. The Burgel Hiddage, a document probably compiled in the early 10th century, but reflecting burhs across Wessex and newly secured Mercia. Each site comes with a number of hides, a tax unit roughly equating to the amount of land needed to support a household. The system's math is explicit. For every pole 5.5 yards of defensive wall, calculate 4 men. Since each hide produced 1 soldier for garrison duty, the total hides assigned to a burh matched the manpower required to hold its perimeter. Winchester, for example, is assigned 2,400 hides in the Hiddage, translating to a perimeter of 600 poles, about 3,300 yards. The point wasn't just to build walls, it was to crisscross the realm, with mutually supporting strongpoints carefully placed near roads, rivers, and fords. It made Viking cavalry raids deadly allergic to progress. This went hand in hand with another clever change: rotating military service. Alfred divided the fyrd so that one contingent manned the burhs and farms, while another took the field, then rotated. Men could fight without knowing that an absent week meant their thatch got torched. Farms kept producing food. Fortresses kept their gates manned, an unsexy innovation, a war winner. He also built ships, while later propaganda crowned him father of the English navy. The Vikings and Frisians, and even the Romans, had been doing maritime defense long before Alfred's backyard had a boathouse. What he did was try to scale up. Asser says Alfred designed ships neither after Frisian nor after Danish fashion, but built as he himself thought they might be more serviceable and longer than the Danes' priceable, with up to 60 oars. In 897, his ships encountered 6 Viking vessels near the Isle of Wight. In the thin channel waters, tide and shoals turned the battle into a bumper car melee. Some of Alfred's heavier warships ran aground with the enemy when the tide fell. Some fights devolved into brutal deck-to-deck brawls. Several Viking ships were destroyed, but the limits of giant boats in shallow water got obvious. It's not the crisp birth of the Royal Navy. It's field testing with splinters. The enemy did not retire politely after 878. In 892 and 92, 893, a fresh wave of Viking forces crossed from the continent. One fleet at Appledore in Kent, another under and leader named Haystein at Milton, and then Benfleet in Essex. Haystein is chaos with cheekbones, a career raider who understood terror as a business model. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes the English response in unglamorous, grinding detail. Edward, Alfred's son, beat the Appledore force at Farnham in 893 and captured their plunder. Another set of Vikings got trapped and starved out at Buttington on the River Severn by a coalition of Englishmen and Welsh under Ethelred of Mercia. Alfred himself dashed back and forth to plug gaps, marching to Exeter to deal with a raiding force that slipped into the west, shadowing Hastings's column across the Thames Valley as it tried to find a place to break something expensive. The whole campaign had the rhythm of a chase scene, scored by long drum beats. Hastings' camp at Benfleet got wrecked by the English in 894 when Hastain and much of his host were away. Edward took the fort, seized ships, and captured Hastings' wife and 2 sons. Here comes a moment that shows Alfred's style. Earlier, to secure some breathing room, or perhaps as part of policy to peel off leaders, Hastain had undergone baptism, with Alfred's son as sponsor. When Alfred held Hastings' family at Benfleet, he returned them, unharmed, after Hasting reavowed the terms. It reads like magnanimity, with a steel aftertaste. Alfred refused to let Viking leaders turn him into a man who traded blood for a weekend victory. It also turned Hastings' public narrative on itself. The guy who spikes churches with corpses just got his family back because an English king wanted to outmaneuver him morally as well as militarily. The raiders moved again, seizing Shoebury, slogging across the Midlands, wintering in Chester amid Roman ruins and fortress lines. Alfred pursued with supply-state ruthlessness, destroying crops in radius around enemy positions. So the Vikings starved. In 895, 896, the remnant fleets crawled back toward the Thames and Lea. Alfred had his men build fortifications on the rivers, blocking the ships. By 896, the campaign trickled out. The Chronicle says some Viking groups fled to East Anglia and Northumbria. Others took their boats back to the continent. The Burr system and rotating fard had made southern England unfun for raiders, which is exactly what the strategy promised. He kept legislating through all this. Around the late 880s, or early 890s, Alfred issued a law code, what later writers call the Domboc, Book of Judgments. The preface is unusual. He copied earlier laws from Athelbert of Kent. C. 602. Ian of Wessex, K. 694. An Offa of Mercia, late 8th century, then fused them with principles from Mosaic law and Christian ethics. He included the 10 Commandments. He emphasized fairness and the importance of intent in crimes. He took a long detour to tell a story about a Roman judge, Constantine, ordering a son to execute his father mistaken for a thief, a parable against unjust verdicts. Alfred scolded judges who delivered foolish or crooked decisions and reportedly removed some from office for ignorance, insisting they learn or leave. There's a medieval rumor, centuries later, that Alfred hanged 44 judges for corruption. That favorite shock line belongs in the myth category. The contemporary sources just show a king who micromanaged justice to avoid having marauders outside and idiocy inside. He didn't conquer the whole island. That credit laundering move came later, when English historians turned the Alfred Edward Ed and Aethelflaed Adhelstan sequence into a single heroic arc. Alfred set the stage. Edward the Elder and Aethelflaed recovered territory in the Nethen and 1907s and 1907s. Alfred's grandson, Aethelstan, beat a coalition at Brunanburh in 937 and became the first to call himself King of all Britain. Alfred's hands planted the seeds and his mind picked the orchard site. There are softer notes under the political base. He founded religious houses. Shaftesbury Abbey for nuns around 888 with his daughter Athelgifu as abbess, a small monastery at Athelney, with John the Old Saxon as its first abbot. He supported relic cults and gave land for the soul-protecting prayers of monastic communities. These acts served policy too. Every monastery meant a literacy node, a place to copy and store books, a station on the network of knowledge that he was stitching together through translation projects and school requirements. The medical problem never really eased. Asser paints an image of a king who suffered nightly pain, who couldn't eat much, who had to plan energy like a quartermaster. That candle clock mattered, because minutes mattered. He allotted time for prayer, business, reading and rest with mechanical regularity. The picture is weirdly modern. A leader living by a schedule, measuring work against a fixed day, dealing with chronic illness, and running a complex organization anyway. He died on the 26th of October, 899, probably in his early 50s. He was buried first at the Old Minster in Winchester. When his son finished the new minster in 903, Alfred's body was moved. In 1110, after the Norman refoundation, his bones were translated again to Hyde Abbey, outside the north gate of Winchester. Then England went full Henry V in the 1530s. Monasteries got dissolved, monks got evicted, owns got scattered. In the 19th century, work crews digging the site of Hyde Abbey reportedly found bones and tossed them aside. In 1999, excavations at the Hyde site uncovered human remains. In 2013, a different exhumation at St. Bartholomew's in Winchester briefly grabbed headlines, but those bones dated to later centuries. A separate pelvic bone found at Hyde tested in 2014 to a date range of 890, 510, 17 C, and belonged to a man aged 26, 45. That fits Alfred's era, but also his son, Edward. The identification remains inconclusive. The man who knitted a state's memory together now has a grave story with a missing piece, painfully on brand. Because of that absence, relics like the Alfred jewel ended up doing double duty, standing in for a body in a biography. Too much gets assigned to a king who touched so much. The myth pile keeps growing. He invented trial by jury. No. He banned the death penalty. No. He invented school for everyone. Not in the modern sense. He invented the English language. Definitely no. He did something quieter, and in the long term, more intense. He made West Saxon power feel like home. He put thought into systems and transmission, and made kingship an office with a reading list. The debunking does not drain the poetry. The burnt cake story is charming, but late. The disguised minstrel tale, where Alfred allegedly dressed as a harpist and wandered into Guthrum's camp to scout it, belongs even later and lives as swashbuckling fan fiction for people who like their kings crafty with a lute. The real espionage was geography, building forts that forced enemy movement into predictable corridors, then filling those corridors with men who had eaten breakfast and knew where to meet. London's makeover dressed as civic pride and wore coinage as a marketing campaign. Coins of the two emperors, type circulated in the late 870s and 880s, showing twin rulers crowned and facing each other. A throwback to late Roman imperial imagery. It's not a selfie with Guthrum. It's a design borrowed from deeper time to say, this is an order with a memory. The London monogram, coins, advertised control of the mint and the message. Alfred wasn't just angling to survive. He wanted a story where England spoke Old English with pride and wrote it down instead of letting it fade into legal mutterings while Latin did all the paperwork. The law code folded kindness into calculation. Alfred matched wergilds, compensation payments for killing or injury, across the border to prevent cross-cultural misunderstandings from turning into blood feuds. If a Dane killed an Englishman, the payment followed Danelaw rates on his side of the line, and English rates on the other. Matching systems doesn't sound glorious. It is civil engineering for the soul. The way he made time visible reads like a diary of self-discipline. His candles measured 4-hour units. 6 candles meant roughly 24 hours if the conditions cooperated. Lanterns with horn windows fixed the cooperation problem. Imagine a king who times his day by watching notches on wax shrink while scribes read from Gregory or Orosius. The detail lands because it's small and stubbornly human. Everyone knows what it's like to juggle commitments. Alfred did it with light and horn and a body that didn't want to cooperate. There is nothing soft about that strength. He built in layers because reality forced it. In 871, cash for peace. In 878, bog and blades and a treaty line. In 886, London's walls. In 893, 896, river blocking, earthworks, and famine as a weapon. Alongside it all, a reading program, legal revisions, and promotions for men who could read and judge without fumbling. He appointed Plegmund as Archbishop in 819 not only for piety, but for brainpower. He made bishops part of the state machine that recycled knowledge as a resource. His children personified the policy. Edward the Elder's campaigns, coordinated with his sister Ethelflad in Mercia, chewed through Danelaw's strongholds in the 910s. Edward fortified the frontier, north and east, in the same birth, logic. Malden, Towcester, Buckingham, Bedford. Ethelflad built or rebuilt burhs at places like Tamworth and Stafford. Every one of those moves sprouted in Alfred's core idea that strong places linked, beat fast ships, linked, beat fast ships, unlinked. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, likely systematized during Alfred's reign, recorded these moves year by year in various monastic centers. Different versions disagree on details. That's what a living chronicle looks like. Asser's Life of Alfred, written in 893, remains the main 9th century narrative source. Scholars fought over its authenticity in the 20th century, like undergraduates over last pizza slices. The consensus has settled back to genuine, with some later tweaks, which is academic for the profoundly human truth that books, like kingdoms, don't stay untouched. A favorite bit from Asser that deserves more airtime is the literacy contest that supposedly kicked off Alfred's childhood learning. Osber, his mother, showed the royal brothers a beautifully illuminated book of English verse and promised it to the one who could learn it first. Alfred, the youngest, loved the sound so much that he memorized the verses before he could even read the letters. He then harried his teacher to unlock the code, whether every detail there is literal or not. The muscle memory it reveals is consistent. Alfred absorbed information and then obsessed over format so the next person could absorb it faster. He distributed money with a calculated pattern. The Chronicle and Asser suggest he divided his yearly royal income into precise shares, half for secular expenses, half for religious. The religious half got sliced again among poor relief, monasteries in Wessex, monasteries beyond the sea, and the church hierarchy. The image is governance. The image is governance. This isn't glamour. It's flowcharts and wax tablets. It works because math doesn't care if the neighbor is a Viking, even in defeat. He extracted leverage. The winter at Athelney burned off illusions. He learned that standing armies beat emergency musters, that cities intimidate even men who fancy themselves storm gods, and that leaders who read get one more lever against chaos than leaders who don't. He chased knowledge because he knew too well what ignorance costs. He also knew performance matters. The baptism of Guthrum was no fate, a complete photo op. It made Guthrum a godson, a relationship with layers in early medieval society. Later on, when raiders got baptized for practical reasons, Alfred's consistent public framing of himself as the steadfast Christian king who would protect the faithful but also write fair laws for all kept centering legitimacy. Charlemagne did a version of this in the Frankish world. Alfred absorbed and localized it, then fit it to the island's contours and pagan neighbors across the border. Coins whispered the message in pockets. The law code sang it aloud in churches when bishops read prefaces to congregations who did not yet read but understood rhythm and authority. Burrs shouted it from ramparts when men in mail looked down at speedboats getting tired against tides and stakes. Not everything worked. Those oversized ships did okay, in bad conditions, and absolutely groaned like furniture on a gravel driveway when the tide changed. The first London Wall repairs around 886 did not cure the city's vulnerability to fire or factional friction. The 10th century still saw brawls and political knife fights. His health probably cost him hours and days he would have cheerfully spent on bureaucracy or carpentry. But the ratio of failure to learning made him different. His humor, though rarely recorded explicitly, peeks through in choices. Returning Hastings' family after taking them caused monastic chroniclers to write sentences that feel smug in the best way. It read like a pious mic drop. Alfred also loved to lift old things into new light. The Roman two emperors coin image, horn windows in lanterns, Latin books in English translation, like a man who walks through a flea market and sees future technologies in yesterday's kitchenware. Everyone else saw old wine jars. He saw library network infrastructure. The English language owes him gratitude, not for invention, but for validation. His program insisted that the vernacular could carry law, history, philosophy, and pastoral guidance. That act of saying, "This language can," filled monasteries with bilingual minds, who later gave the world works, like the Old English Bede, the Chronicle in multiple recension, and vernacular sermons that helped English survive as a literary medium after the Norman conquest tried to hand the microphone to French and Latin. He remained a family man inside the crown. He entrusted London's restoration to Ethelred of Mercia, husband to his daughter, a felflad, which looked like delegation and bonded two power centres without devouring one. He settled his son Edward with practical experience by putting him in command at Farnham. Nepotism becomes statecraft when the relatives are competent and fostered incompetence. Alfred engineered that. Contemporary statistics, for those who want the chills that numbers bring. Year of birth, 840, 849. Died, the 26th of October, 899. Battles against Vikings, in 871 alone. 9 major engagements, plus countless skirmishes per Assa. Boundary of the treaty with Guthrum, along the Thames and Lear to Bedford, along the Ouse to Watling Street. A frontier measurable on maps today. Burgall, Hiddarge, hides for Winchester, 2400. Formula. 4 hides per pole of wall. 1 pole equals 5.5 yards. 600 poles equals about 3,300 yards of circuit. Estelle gift value to bishops. 50 gold mancuses, roughly 212.5 grams of gold by weight. Ships in Alfred's, 897. Encounter near the Isle of Wight. 9 English ships versus 6 Viking vessels, with several enemy ships captured or destroyed. and several English ships grounded with the tide. The best myths about him are small. The worst are large. The big lie is that he single-handedly united England. He didn't. He could not have. The machine he built, plus the people he trained, did. But the small myths, candles that mark time, a jewel that points words, a king who reads during hunts, a man in pain who refuses to make a spectacle of it. These are the valves through which his heart still communicates. The cakes do not need to burn for the story to glow. A swamp in 878 is enough. Mud applied pressure to reality. Alfred responded with edges and lines, of walls, of rivers dammed, of legal phrases that fit human conflicts, like well-sewn tunics. He did not seek glory as a berserker, crushing skulls. He sought advantage as a systems designer who understood that fortress plans are weapons and that children taught to read become citizens harder to conquer. The English remembered him stubbornly. Around 1042, when Edward the Confessor took the throne after a Danish royal line, chroniclers still used Alfred as an anchor. After 1066, Norman writers learned to praise him as a righteous ancestor, the kind of king even conquerors calculate to compliment. He travels through English memory like someone humming a tune under louder songs. The Alfred who rebuilt London, who sat godfather to a baptized enemy king, who sent out books with gold pointing sticks, so bishops couldn't claim they didn't get the memo. But Alfred resists forgetting. He also leaves detective stories behind. The search for his bones keeps failing. The Alfred jewel likely served as one of the 50 Mancus Estelles referenced in his book gift program, but nobody wrote a receipt saying, this one attached to Plegman's copy. The lane called Alfred's Tower at Stourhead is 18th century romantic tribute, not medieval history. The Marsh Fort at Athelney has a monument erected in 1801, a neat spike of later pride on the soft ground where a cold January forced a hard reconsideration of everything that mattered. In that marsh, he faced extinction. What he saved first was not a flag, but a process. He set a rendezvous point. He called men by oath. He arranged time and supplies. He aimed, then marched. Eddington was not destiny. It was fieldcraft and nerve. Wedmore and the treaty that followed were not divine inevitabilities. They were negotiation in the shadow of a collapsed autumn. London's restoration was not some nationalist flourish. It was securing a commercial node and mint that could send salaries downriver, where men manned ferry stops in the Lea Valley and shrugged when raiders growled. The dullest details sing when they keep lives from ending violently. Alfred learned that, like a scar, he hid in a swamp. He surfaced with the first draft of a state. He sent a jewel into the world with the note, Alfred ordered me made, and later centuries read it as a signature on more than enamel and rock crystal. It signed a method. It signed a style. It signed a promise that Englishness would mean something more than shared danger. It would mean shared instruction, shared defenses, and shared stories told in the local tongue with pride. He has oddities that prove he was real. He may have suffered from something that made rich foods dangerous. He may have counted hours by the speed of fire. He may have gripped a book with cold fingers after boar hunts that left the ground chewed up and steaming. He married the daughter of a Mercian noble and gave a daughter to Flanders, turned Christmas into a war season when he didn't have a choice, then forced winter to become a planning month instead of a death sentence for towns without walls. His reign compressed into mottos. Looks like this. Pay for time. Use time like a weapon. Build where roads cross. Rotate men so fields feed soldiers and gates hold night and day. Translate so minds march too. Baptize an enemy king because religion can be a treaty tool as well as a private consolation. Give judges homework. Fire the lazy. Thank the competent. Make lanterns where wind tries to say no. Use coins to gossip that the realm is alive. The English never truly stop, relitigating the word great in his name. Historians test it like a coin on a tooth. The metal rings true because the greatness is not in a single impossible miracle, but in a sequence of possible acts done persistently. Even better, he did it under pressure, under pain, and often underfunded. That's the flavor of real greatness, the kind that keeps neighborhoods safe more than it keeps poets busy. So the swamp stays the right opening frame. It holds the Madeline of the cake story, even when the best footnotes say late and likely apocryphal. It holds a man learning that he can be broken and remain unbroken. That glory usually looks like mud, and that empires of the future are built with planks, laws, coins, and grammars drawn into the present like breath. Alfred the Great, King of Wessex from 871 to 899, defender of the English, in a century when that identity barely had edges, exited the marsh with a plan. He made the plan contagious, and the country that eventually called itself England learned how to keep breathing. Next, let's turn our attention to the rise and fall of the Parthian Empire, a desert plain, a burning sun, and a Roman army melting under a rain of arrows. The richest man in Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus, rides into Mesopotamia in 53 BC, with 7 legions and a dream of out-Alexandering Alexander. On the other side, a Parthian aristocrat named Shurina, 20-something, reportedly wearing makeup and jewelry like a rock star of the Iranian plateau, but commanding a logistical machine that does not care about Roman swagger. Plutarch, who absolutely enjoys a dramatic downfall, lays it out. Around 10,000 Parthian horse archers, 1,000 armored cataphracts, and a baggage train of camels, loaded with spare arrows. Crassus brings heavy infantry and pride. Shurina brings mobility, composite bows, and a tactic Roman textbooks hate. The Parthian shot, turn in the saddle, loose an arrow while retreating, and let physics handle the humility lesson. Result: roughly 20,000 Romans dead, 10,000 marched off into captivity. Eagle standards swallowed by the East, Crassus dead in a desert fiasco. The climax of a story that starts as a steppe raid and swells into an empire, running from the Euphrates to the Hindu Kush. That empire rose under a name that sounds like a dynasty and a brand: Arsaces. The Parthian Empire begins with him, Arsaces High, the chief of the Parni, one of the Dahe nomad confederation, hugging the northeastern edge of the Hellenistic world. Greek sources, like Strabo, lump the Dahe near the Caspian. Modern maps point to the steppes, east of the Caspian Sea. The Seleucid Empire, stretched thin by wars and distance, loses its local governor in Parthia, Andragoras, who declares independence around the 240 SB and tries to go solo. A frontier overstretched, a governor off the leash, and a nomad leader with timing, around 247 BC in the Seleucid era calendar, an anchor date used in later Parthian traditions. Arsaces is proclaimed king. The actual conquest of Parthia and Hyrcania unfolds a bit later, likely around 238 B. The sources are messy, and the coins and Babylonian diaries do the heavy lifting of chronology. What matters? A new house takes root. Arsaces I rules from roughly 247 to 211 Beach. Then Arsaces II from 211 to 191 Beach. Their early world is small, based in the mountain-rimmed region, later called Khorasan. with capitals like Nisa, Old Nisa, near modern Ashgabat, and Hecatampylos, the 100-gated city, whose exact ruins keep historians squinting at the desert. Around Damgan and Sharud, Nisa yields ivory writer, with Greek myth scenes, seals with Iranian names, warehouses recorded on Ostraca and Parthian script, and a royal necropolis. The dynasty keeps Greek city administrators happy enough to not burn down the place, and they marry local nobility to lock in the power. Parthia is not a tent camp. It is a hybrid. Then a switch flips with Mithridates I, on the throne from 171 to 132 Bes. His resume reads like an ancient version of speedrunning Empire mode. He absorbs media around 148 Backs, folds Babylonia into his orbit by 141 Backs, and forces Bactrian kings to hold onto their crowns with both hands. Seleucia on the Tigris, the great Hellenistic metropolis, founded by Seleucus I, falls into Parthian hands. The Babylonian astronomical diaries duly note the new reality. The Parthian king adopts the Achaemenid-flavored title, King of Kings. Coins go big with Greek legend text, calling him Basiai Labe, Great King, and Parthian rulers never again pretend they. A small time. A royal residence is established at Ctesiphon, on the east bank of the Tigris, opposite Seleucia, probably in the late 2nd century Bes. That Tigris duo will become the political heartbeat of Mesopotamia for centuries. The empire spreads fast, and then the steppe hits back. The Parthian frontier in the east buckles under nomadic migrations. Saka and Yezi push into Bactria, and the Iranian plateau. Freya II, ruling from 132 to 137, Bes dies in battle against nomads. Justin's epitome calls them Scythians, and Artabanus I, ruling from 127 to 124 Bucks, also dies fighting them, perhaps against the Tokaroi. Sistan becomes Sakistan, literally, land of the sucker. Hypermobile horse archers who blow up settled empires are not a Roman-only problem. Parthian kings grapple with the same migration matrix that topples Bactria and reroutes trade. Enter the restorer, Mithridates II, the Great, ruling from about 124 to 91 batch. He stabilizes the East, pushes back against nomads, and carves out diplomatic corridors that change Eurasian trade. A Han Chinese envoy, Jiang Qian, reports on Anxai, Parthia, in the Shiji and Hamsu. Parthian merchants start appearing as middlemen in the Silk Circuit. The Han sources describe Anxi as a place with numerous cities, customs similar to the Romans, and merchants who control the Western markets. Around 96 or 95 Bes, a Parthian envoy meets the Roman official Sulla near the Euphrates. This is the first official contact between Rome and Iran's new dynasty. Mithridates II also likely pulls Armenia into vassal orbit. The coinage shouts confidence. Portraits show a monarch with a diadem and serious royal hair. The empire feels like a revival of Achaemenid geopolitics with a Hellenistic toolkit, and it works. Then the gears grind. After Mithridates II's death, around 91 by, succession crises multiply. Coins split into rival issues. Justin's epitome compresses the confusion into a parade of names. Sinatrusis, 7869b, stabilizes some edges, and Phraeates 3c, 7057b's, plays a clever balancing game between Roman strongmen. But the Romans are no longer content to shake hands at the Euphrates and leave. Pompey walks into the Near East, rearranges Judea and Armenia, and everyone pretends not to notice that Parthia is a rising empire. Orodes to Dis, takes the Parthian throne in 57 Bes, and his brother Mithridates makes a complicating appearance. Civil war. Obviously, the Parthian great houses, especially the house of Shuran, decide who lives and who does not. Shurna, head of that clan, defeats Mithridates at Seleucia and delivers the crown to Orodes. The reward, the command against Crassus in 53 Bes, and the historical cameo that punches above its word count. The desert at Cara swallows hubris. Roman infantry forms testudo under arrow storms. Cataphracts smash lines, and drums keep the tempo. Sharana brings an innovation the Romans can barely process. An army that never runs out of arrows because the camels never stop arriving. Plutarch's narrative drips with theatrical elements. Golden standards topped by dragons, beating war drums. The wild laughter of the horsemen. But the logistics sit there like a spreadsheet of doom. Contemporaries measure empires by what they take from Rome. Parthia takes Roman legionary eagles and Roman dignity, and it keeps them for decades. Julius Caesar makes plans to march east and settle the score, but daggers in 44 buck. Cancel that storyline. Then Parthia makes a louder entrance, around 40 batch, with the Roman world. In civil war, a Parthian force, under Pacorus, Icorus, Rhodes' brilliant son, and the Roman renegade Quintus, Labienus, sweeps through Syria and Judea. Herod flees. The city gates of Jerusalem see Parthian banners. Coins from Tyre and Damascus ping around the markets under new management. It looks like a sequel to Carhae, with better pry. Rome counters fast. Publius Ventidius Bassus, a commander who rose from war captive to consul material, marches east and undoes the Parthian surge. He beats Labienus near the Cilician gates and takes his head. In 38 Bais, at Mount Gindarus, Ventidius crushes Pacorus, who dies in retreat. For Parthia, Pacorus' death is a gut punch. Orodes orders mass grief at court. Justin says he executes his capable general Sharena earlier, out of jealousy, which ages about as well as an open amphora. Rome learns the playbook. Avoid pitched battles in open desert, bait Parthians into rough terrain, and bring infantry coverage with auxiliary missile troops. Marcus Antonius tries to convert Roman lessons into personal glory. In 36 Bus, he drags an enormous army east, at least 100,000, depending on the historian, and marches into Media, Atropatene to take the fortress of Phraspa. Armenian cavalry promised by King Artavus does not show up in the necessary numbers. Siege engines do not keep up. Parthian defenders destroy the Roman siege train. Antony retreats with frostbite, adding insult to arrow wounds. Cassius Dio puts Roman losses at around 30,000. Antony's propaganda pivots to Alexandria, pageantry. Parthia remains unconquered. The stalemate hardens into diplomacy. In 20 Bus, Augustus Octavian, now running a pacified Rome, does not march but negotiates. He obtains the return of the Carhae standards and Roman prisoners from Phraates Eve. The Parthian king keeps his throne. Augustus erects monuments at home about a victory without a battle. Coinage proclaims Signus Receptus. The image radiates power on both sides. Parthia owns the battlefield narrative. Rome owns the marble. Parthian court life does not calm down. Phraates, ruling from 37 to 2 Barch, deals with domestic coups, including an internal overthrow by a claimant backed by Romans, Tiridates VI, and repeated fights with Armenian succession. He then receives a Roman gift with a lifetime subscription to palace drama, an Italian slave named Musa, sent by Augustus, who becomes queen. Freytime sends 4 sons to Rome as hostages around 10b to reduce palace intrigue. Musa bears a son, Phraetius, Phraetus V, and secures the succession. Coins of 2 base to 4c show queen and king together. Then a regicide rumor cloud grows. Josephus, the Jewish historian, writes that Musa poisoned Frey's wife. What follows is a mother-son co-rule that freaks out even Roman gossip writers. Romans consider their own dynastic chaos a sport, and still this makes them blink. 1st century, Parthia circles around Armenia like moths around a porch light. Augustus installs Tigranes V. Parthians sit him down. Romans set up another. Parthians respond. Tiberius watches. Germanicus travels east around 18c to settle matters. The ping-pong continues. Vononzai, a son of Phrates I raised in Rome, takes the Parthian throne, circa 812c, but his Roman grooming and fancy Alexandrian diamonds annoy the Parthian nobility. He loses support, flees to Armenia. Then Armenia becomes another episode of whiplash politics. Artabanus IV takes the Parthian throne around 12c, resets the relationship, and parades power across Media and Mesopotamia. Tacitus offers a running commentary in his Annals that feels like a Middle Eastern season of a prestige series. Kings installed, kings deposed, embassies making snarky demands without memes because ink and wax do the job. By 51, say, Vologases, I consolidates domestic control and makes a big move. He installs his brother Tiridates on the Armenian throne, a play that flips the map. Roman Emperor Nero, better at theatre than tactics, decides to approach the problem with maximum pageantry. After several campaigns under Corbulo and others, the settlement in 66 sex seals the vibe. Tiridates, an Arsacid prince, travels to Rome, bows to Nero in a choreographed ceremony, and is crowned king of Armenia by the emperor. Rome keeps the right to bestow the crown. Parthia keeps a bloodline on the throne. Everyone pretends this is a Roman victory. The eastern provinces understand the subtext. Underneath the theatre, Parthia's structure keeps flexing its medieval energy. Centuries before medieval becomes a concept. The great noble houses, Shurin, Karen, and others, raise armies, control cities, and sometimes make kings. The monarchy is powerful, wearing a diadem and the title King of Kings, but not absolute. Think of it as a federation of satrapies and client kingdoms like Adiabene, Characene, Messene at the head of the Persian Gulf, Elames in Khuzestan, and Osoroene around Edessa, each balancing tribute, autonomy, and a permanent itch to switch sides when expedient. A Diabena's royal house even converts to Judaism in the 1st century. Queen Helena and King Isaetes get shout-outs in Josephus, and Parthia shrugs and treats it as a tax and loyalty question, sooner than a religious one. This religious elasticity pays dividends in urban markets, from Ctesiphon to Merv. On coins, Greek still reigns as the public-facing language into the mid-1st century c. Basilos, basil, drachms, tetradrachms, clink out of Seleucia and later Ctesiphon. Faces on the obverse morph through the centuries, from neatly bearded rulers with Hellenistic cheekbones to lush-haired kings with heavy eyes and sometimes a hint of an earring. On the reverse sits a seated archer, often labelled Arsakes, an ancestral brand identity. Over time, Aramaic and Parthian, Arsacid Pahlavi script, starts to edge in, and by the late 1st century say, bilingual and then Parthian-only legends turn up. Administration follows suit. Greek remains useful in Hellenistic cities. Aramaic and Parthian carry the empire's paperwork across satrapies. Ostraka from Nisa list wine allocations, fodder rations, and names of court servants in an empire that definitely keeps receipts. Military life under the Arsacids looks like the poster for cavalry supremacy. Parthian armies hinge on two arms: light horse archers who can sustain a day-long exchange at range, and heavy cataphracts, men and horses wrapped in lamella plates, who crash into stunned infantry. The composite bow is the real star, with horn and sinew layers that store elastic energy far beyond a basic wooden stick. Training creates riders who can twist backward, mid-gallop, and fire accurately. The feigned retreat lures disciplined enemies into breaking formation. The famous Parthian shot slides into English as parting shot, a shift that delights etymologists and annoys pedants. Cataphract gear emerges earlier in the Iranian world and among steppe neighbors, but Parthia standardizes it as a state signature. Siege craft lags behind. When walls go up, Parthian momentum often pauses, which explains why the Roman cities of Syria survive repeated threats by clinging to fortifications. Economically, Parthia runs the toll booths on 1,000 roads that schoolbooks once flattened into the Silk Road. Isidore of Charax, in his work Parthian Stations, itemizes caravan routes from the Euphrates to the Indus, like a meticulous travel agent. Charax Basina, at the head of the Persian Gulf, Apologos, Susa, Ecbatana, Rage, Hecatompylos, Susia near Murph. Onward to Bactra. Parthian satraps and client kings tap customs with the enthusiasm of border patrol on overtime. Silk comes from the Han world. Glassware, wine, and silverware head east. Aromatics climb up the Gulf. Central Asian horses and furs flow in. The city of Charax Sparsano mints its own coins under local kings named Atambalos and Apodakos. Hatra, a fortified Arab city in Upper Mesopotamia, allied with Parthia, thrives as a temple city with walls so good that Trajan and later Septimius Severus struggle to crack them. Late antique stonework glows in desert light. Inscriptions in Aramaic, Greek, and Arabic churn alongside images of gods who look at once Mesopotamian and Iranian. The empire is a brokerage, not a monolith. Roman emperors of the 2nd century bring empires into violent proximity again and again. Trajan, a conqueror with a checklist, rolls east in 114. Armenia becomes a province. Edessa submits. Ctesiphon is occupied in 116 C. A Roman general's dream realized. Trajan coins announce Parthicus. He installs Parthomaspates as a client king and declares Mesopotamia annexed. Then the empire-wide revolts light up the map, especially the Kitos War, the diaspora Jewish revolt in 115-117 across Cyrene, Egypt, Cyprus, and Mesopotamia, and supply lines stretch. Trajan falls ill and dies in 117. His successor, Hadrian, looks at the map, looks at the budget, and gives up the eastern conquests because keeping them would be an annual ulcer. The Roman public facade reframes it as wise restraint. Parthia frames it as evidence that patience outlasts panache. Lucius Verus, co-emperor, with Marcus Aurelius, gets another eastern round between 161 and 166. Vologases I of Parthia had pounced on Armenia in 161, sparking the war. Roman generals avenged the affront with methodical force. Avidius Cassius leads an army down the Euphrates, sacks Ctesiphon in 165 or 166, burns the royal palace, and leaves again. The Antonine Plague rides the legions home, possibly a smallpox variant. The empire's trade networks become disease networks. Contemporary observers count dead by the thousands. Modern estimates guess at a mortality shock measured in millions across the Mediterranean and Near East. Parthia bleeds. Rome bleeds. Both empires keep going with scar tissue. Caracalla, the emperor in 216, Su, who thinks being Alexander, requires cosplay and war, marches east, slaughters Parthians who come to negotiate, and ravages towns. This escalates into a fight near Nisibis in 217 C, where Parthians under Artabanus Hive execute the cavalry textbook again. Caracalla is assassinated on the road. His successor Macrinus buys peace with a huge indemnity. Cassius Dio mentions 200 million denarii and goods, because paying the bill beats being fed to arrows under a Mesopotamian sun. Every few decades, some Roman aristocrat imagines repeating Trajan. Every time Mesopotamia whispers through reeds on the floodplain that the land grants victory to the logistics pro, not the ego trip. If the outside story sounds like an unending duel with Rome, the inside story decides the ending. Parthia's aristocratic federation, so good at raising cavalry, balancing local power, and integrating cities, carries a structural weakness. Succession turns into an extreme sport. The king of kings often has multiple wives, multiple sons, and multiple noble factions, choosing sides, which creates a roulette wheel at every funeral. By the late 2nd century C, coinage reveals dual reigns. Vologases Vi, 191, 208 C, and his son Vologases Vi, starting in 208 C, mint concurrently with the challenger Artabanus IV, whose coins start around 213 Ser. The empire looks like a multiple-choice quiz, where none of the answers equal stability. The Surens still brandish their lineage. Other clans elevate their lineage. Other clans elevate their own champions. Whatever central army exists has to be rebuilt. Every reign from satrapal musters, and every muster invites negotiation. Meanwhile, in the southern province of Persis, Fars, a local dynasty sharpens steel. The Persis kings have been vassals under Parthia for generations, minting their little silver coins with Zoroastrian fire, altars, and kingly faces, running temples at Istaka near Persepolis, and advertising Achaemenid nostalgia with quiet stubbornness. A noble named Ardashir, son of Parpak, Babak, inherits the governorship of Dar Abjerd around 205 C, seizes Istakar, pushes aside his own brother, Shapur, and starts annexing nearby districts. His home base is at Gaur, Ardashir Quara, later Firuzabad, where a circular planned city emerges with a royal palace and stucco-laden halls. The Sasanian family claims ancestry from a priest named Sasan. The details are murky because their propaganda department is excellent and their enemies' archives are thin. What matters? A motivated local power picks a fight with an exhausted suzerain. Artabanus Ivith understands the threat, but cannot smother it in time. Battles thump across Persis and Khuzestan in the early 220s S. At Hormozd Gan in 224 C, near modern Ram Hormozd on the margins of Susiana, Ardashir meets Artabanus Ivith in a decisive fight. Later Sasanian rock reliefs and chronicles paint a triumph with chilling simplicity. Ardashir's lancers break the Parthian cataphract. Line. The king of kings dies on the field. Nobles either defect or accept new royal ideology. Within a couple of years, Ctesiphon falls to Ardashir. By 226, C is crowned king of kings of Iranians, with Zoroastrian priests, fire altars at his side, and an administrative blueprint that looks more centralized than Parthia's federation ever managed. The Ars Acid house does not vanish completely. Vologas's V lingers in coin hoards until about 228 C. Ars Acid branches rule Armenia until 428 C. And Ars Acid nobles reappear in Sasanian politics under new names. The banner, however, changes. The rise and fall of Parthia looks like a case study in do not underestimate the neighbors with horses. Hellenistic rulers treated Eastern satrapies as dowry zones and recruitment lists. Parthia turned them into an Iranian imperial revival and made Rome blink. The empire survived repeated Roman invasions, several civil wars, and whole new nomad migrations, and it did that by bending rather than breaking. Greek cities stayed semi-autonomous. Aramaic scribes kept working in their chancelleries. Iranian noble houses kept feeding the crown and extracting concessions. The downside surfaces in the 3rd century. Bending turns into fragmentation. Myths cling to Parthia like sand to oil. One myth pictures Parthia as a pure nomad camp on horseback, with 0 cities. The ruins at Hatra, the markets at Charax, Spasino, the palaces at Ctesiphon, the treasury at Nisa, and the civic life of Seleucia on the Tigris laugh at that image. Another myth declares Carrhae the permanent end of Roman Eastern designs. Trajan, Lucius Verus, and Septimius Severus all forced their boots into Ctesiphon or its hinterlands later. Carrhae stings. It does not cement divine borders. A third myth crowns the Parthian shot as an unbeatable tactic that Rome never answers. Roman auxiliary archers, Syrian slingers, and cavalry reforms under emperors like Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius show adaptation. Even at Carrhae, Roman cohorts in tight formation withstand hours of arrow fire. The disaster happens when discipline, under a nervous general, breaks. The tactic punishes arrogance more than it conjures magic. One more myth claims Parthians did not write, leaving only foreign voices. The ostraca from Nisa, Parthian inscriptions, bilingual coin legends, and administrative records from Mesopotamian cities fill that silence. They did not splash their chronicles like the Romans, but they managed an empire with pens as well as bows. Armenia deserves its own hallway in this gallery. As a frontier kingdom, it experiences the full Arsacid imprint, from Tigranes the Great in the 1st century by. More Hellenistic Armenian power, surfer, than Parthian sock puppet. Through the 66 settlement with Nero, Armenia becomes an Arsacid branch monarchy. Tiridates I, crowned by Nero in Rome, and installed on the Armenian throne, kickstarts a dynasty that survives Roman storms and Sasanian religious policy. Long after 224 Cs, Armenian sources rework Zoroastrian and Greek elements under an Armenian state church. Arsacid genealogies thread through their chronicles as a point of identity. When Parthia falls, Armenia preserves an Arsacid legacy until its abolition under Sasanian and then later Byzantine pressures in 428 C. Religion under the Arsacids wears an Iranian face, with cosmopolitan accessories. Ahura Mazda looms above their ideology, but fire temples at Nisa, coins showing altars, and reliefs across Fars suggest a broad Zoroastrian matrix mixed with local cults. Mithra and Anahita receive devotion. The names of gods adapt in Greek dress on city inscriptions. Jews in Mesopotamia gain institutional heft under Parthian rule. The academies at Nehedia and Nisibis find room to breathe. Josephus writes of Adiabina's royal family converting to Judaism with enough wealth to send golden gifts to the Jerusalem temple. Early Christianity appears in Edessa and along trade corridors. Late in the Arsacid period, Parthia's religious tolerance stems partly from state structure. A crown happy to collect tax from temples of all flavors tolerates many altars. Art history classes sometimes skip Parthian visual culture, and that is a miss. Parthian art favors frontality, statues looking straight ahead, as if staring down viewers, and revels in stucco, brick reliefs, and earwands, barrel-vaulted halls open on one side. This architecture leaves footprints in late Iranian and Islamic buildings. See Ctesiphon's Tak Kasra, that soaring Iwan arch, still standing from Sasanian times, echoes Parthian precedents. In sculpture, ruffled tunics, trousers, and soft caps, bashlaks, wander through carved scenes. Hellenistic naturalism and Iranian hieratic stylization share walls. Writer from Nyssa staged Dionysus, with Iranian flourish. Coin crowns sprout wings and diadem ties in confident mergers of motifs. This mashup gives the Arsacid world a visual grammar that telegraphs frontier cosmopolitanism rather than provincial backwardness. The Chinese sourcebooks add an eastward mirror. The Shiji and Hansu label Parthia as Angxi and describe it as a state of countless cities and a rich people trading through the western regions. By the 1st century Ce, the later Han text Hao Hansu reports a Chinese envoy, Gan Ying, reaching the Persian Gulf around 97, under Ban Chao's orders before turning back at a discouraging sailor's tale about the long ocean voyage to Da Chin. Rome, Parthians play customs officer, blocking direct China-Rome trade by positioning themselves as middlemen. The Ho Hansu notes their strategy with admiration and annoyance. More evidence of Parthia as broker appears in Roman glass, finds in Central Asia, and Chinese silk in Palmyra tomb reliefs. The Silk Road operates like a web, not a line, and Parthia knows where the sticky threads are. Administration under the Arsacids meshes. Achaemenid echoes with Hellenistic habits. The satrapy remains the basic unit. Governors, satraps, or subordinate kings run their provinces with significant autonomy, expected to provide levies and taxes when called. The royal court migrates between centres. Ctesiphon in winter, Ecbatana in summer, and dispenses legitimacy by sending out diadems and ribbons to crowned heads in a Diabine or Characene. The House of Surin claims the hereditary right to place the royal diadem on the Arsacid head during coronation, a prerogative recorded by Plutarch and validated by later tradition. The relationship between crown and nobles is a contract. Perform militarily, and the throne honors status. Fail, and the throne negotiates with a different noble house. Coinage is culture in metal. The Arsacid silver drachm becomes the currency of the Iranian world for centuries, even into the early Sasanian period, where designs change slowly. Parthian mints dot the empire. Ecbatana, Rage, Mithridatcard, Old Misa, Misa proper, Seleucia / Ctesiphon. The king's face ages and grows hair. The reverse keeps echoing the ancestral archer. Greeks who once collected Alexander's coins now collect Arsacid portraits, wearing diadems and high tiaras. Control of mints equals control of legitimacy. When most of the coin output shows two kings' names in different corners of the empire, civil war is not a footnote, it is the headline. Parthia's impression on languages outlives its crown. Parthian, Arsacid Pahlavi. Script travels west with merchants and clergy. It inflects Middle Persian, later used by Sasanian bureaucracy. It leaves graffiti and tax notes across Mesopotamia. The language shows up in Manichaean texts, centuries later, the result of a religion born in the Sasanian Empire that writes in the scripts people actually read. Aramaic, as the empire's low-friction lingua franca, keeps paperwork flowing. The combination of Parthian and Aramaic under an Aramean crown will shape the semantics of Persianate long after. The fall of Parthia is not the story of an empire outclassed by Roman iron. It is the tale of an empire that perfected a cavalry state model and then ran into a rival Persian group determined to centralize and codify that model under a religious and bureaucratic program. Ardashir seizes more than a throne. He builds an alliance with the Zoroastrian priesthood, claims Achaia Nephthid loudly, reorganizes taxation and provincial administration, and erects a royal ideology that points to a single king invested by a single god over a defined community, the Orange realm of the Iranians. Parthian nobles do not disappear. They become Sasanian nobles, often under new genealogical packaging. Parthian cities do not vanish. They morph into Sasanian centers with fire temple networks and tax granaries labeled in different scripts. Ctesif, P4, keeps being the capital until the 7th century Arab conquests. Even the word Parthian, in its Middle Iranian form Pahlav, becomes shorthand for noble ancestry under the Sasanians. The winners write the inscriptions. The losers provide the family trees. Archaeology rounds out the text. Old Misa's warehouses produced around 3,000 inscribed potsherds, listing shipments of wine and grain in the 1st century by, proving that even steppe-born dynasties love bureaucracy. Vologases, a city on the Euphrates, founded by Vologases, eyed to siphon trade from rebellious Seleucia, shows up in inscriptions and coins as Velashabad, an imperial answer to municipal tantrums. The ruins of Hecatompylos, near Sharud, show Parthian urban planning that flies under radar but fits the empire's caravan logic. Reliefs at Tung Sarvak in Khuzestan, present Parthian nobles in flowing trousers, and front-facing postures beneath inscriptions that archaeologists debate and redate. But their aesthetic screams Arsacid. The Ctesiphon area keeps coughing up coin hoards, mixing Parthian and early Sasanian, issues like a change jar, lost under a palace cushion during a regime change. The clichés about mysterious Parthia dissolve when sources pile up. Greco-Roman authors Polybius, Strabo, Plutarch, Cassius Dio, Tacitus deliver outsider, takes filtered through frontiers and politics. Babylonian cuneiform diaries mark king accessions and omen readings with precision that embarrasses royal biographies. Chinese dynastic histories record Parthia's role in global trade with pragmatic interest. Josephus documents Judea's dance with Parthian politics. Isidore of Charax maps caravan stages with geographic candor. Coins and fort walls supply the control data. The story is not shadowy. It is performative and well-sourced, just not in the same idiom as marble inscriptions on Roman fora. Some snapshots anchor the drama. 247b. Traditional foundation date for Arsacid rule. Seleucid control cracks in the east. Arsaces becomes a royal name and a political program. 238. 228. B. Conquest of Parthia and Hyrcania from the rebel Andragoras. Arsaces I consolidates a core. 171. 132b. Mithridates I turns a regional kingdom into an empire, taking Media, Babylonia, and Bactria's crumbs, and makes Seleucia and Ctesiphon part of a new center. 124. 91b. Mithridates stabilizes and builds a Silk Road state. Han Chinese and Roman contact occurs. Armenia feels the tug. 53b. Kara writes, a cautionary tale in blood and sand Parthian logistics outclass Roman assumptions. 40 to 38 BC. Parthian offensives rock Syria and Judea. Ventidius hits back. A chorus dies. The pendulum swings. 36 BE. Antony bleeds in Media. Siege failure leaves Parthia unbeaten. 20 B. Augustus receives Roman standards. Parthia wins respect without collapse. 66 Se. Tiridates, crowned by Nero. Ars acid Armenia becomes a diplomatic constant. 114. 117. C. Trajan invades. Short-term Roman occupation of Ctesiphon. Strategic overreach reverses under Hadrian. 161-166. Sex. Avidius Cassius Sax. Ctesiphon. The Antonine Plague changes demography. 217. Say. Nisibis. Clash. Roman indemnity. Parthia still sharp. 224. Seher. Hormozdgan. Ardashir kills Artabanus V. The Sasanian program begins. Those aren't bullet points in a textbook. They are episodes in a series where a cavalry empire invents a set of best practices for ruling the Iranian plateau and the Tigris-Euphrates corridor, and where its main enemy is either across the Euphrates or inside its own elite tent. Parthian legacy shows up in places visitors do not expect. The phrase asymmetric warfare gets a historical poster child at Kara, but the deeper lesson is institutional. Fast cavalry, federated aristocracy, and border brokerage build durable power when siege warfare and centralized bureaucracy are too expensive to maintain. The Sasanian army later absorbs Parthian cataphracts into a heavier cavalry corps called Asvaran and layers on a more formal tax and manpower system. The Roman Empire, learning from bruises, expands its own cavalry and missile troops and starts treating desert frontiers like zones of diplomacy and trade rather than pure battlefields. Armenia's Arsacid dynasty demonstrates how royal brand names become institutions across empires. Arsacid in Armenia last 4 centuries after Arsacid in Iran disappears. Even the bad takes become part of the afterlife. Later, Persian epic tradition, like Ferdowsi's Shahnameh compiled under Islamic rulers, but pulling on Sasanian-era law, serenades the glory of kings who fought demons and Romans with no love for the Arsacids, because the Sasanian lens refracts memory. Historical figures blur into fables, named Kay and Khosrow. Yet behind the poetic frame, Parthian houses keep peeking out. Clans that trace descent to the Pahlav, the Parthians, carry prestige well into late antique Iran. Their names, Suran, Karen, Miran, become pillars in Sasanian politics, and then float into Islamic-era genealogies with legends attached. Memory does not flatten. It migrates. The fall of Parthia did not erase the empire. It changed the branding, tightened the vertical integration of state and religion, and gave Roman historians a simpler name to swear at. Kings still ruled from the Tigris banks. Embassies still traded silk and glass. The armies still glinted with metal under a brutal sun. The Sasanian revival sells itself as Achaemenid 2.0. In practice, it is Parthia with a ministry of culture and a clergy contract. Where Parthia allowed 1,000 altars to bloom, so long as taxes arrived, the Sasanian state privileges, Zoroastrian clergy and quilts the realm with fire temples. Where Parthia balanced nobility in a seesaw of favors, the Sasanian state tries to nail the seesaw to the ground with scribes and tax ledgers. One more curious branch grows off Parthia's trunk. The Indo-Parthians, a Parthian noble, Gondopar, carves out a kingdom in Gandhara and northwestern India in the early 1st century CE. Coins show him in Parthian dress, holding the bow of Arsaces. The Acts of Thomas, a Christian apocryphal text, later weaves a story about the Apostle Thomas traveling to India during Gondopar's time. The historicity of that link is debated. The cultural footprint is not. Parthian horizons stretch from Palmyra to Punjab, with craftsmen crisscrossing them and languages swapping loanwords like friendship bracelets. This story does not need fictional dialogue. It has Plutarch's theatre, Tacitus's ice, Strabo's gazetteer, Isidore's roadmap, Josephus' palace gossip, Han China's ledger-like prose, and stone walls that have not collapsed yet. It has numbers. 20,000 Romans, dead at Cara, 10,000 taken, around 96 buys for that first embassy with Rome, 66 for that first embassy with Rome, 66 for Nero's splashy crowning, 116 C for Trajan's C, for form, moment, 224 Su for Ardashir's blade at Hormozd Gan. It has cities, Nisa and Hecatampylos in the northeast, Ecbatana and Ragi in the central highlands, Seleucia, Ctesiphon, and Vologases in the Mesopotamian lowlands, Hatra guarding the Jazeera, Charax ruling the Gulf's commerce. It has objects, ivory writer, from Nisa with Greek gods, carved in Iranian hands, queen portraits that age from beardless to patriarchal, arrowheads littering Mesopotamian fields, stucco reliefs on eons that suggest a design language still alive centuries later in brick arches. One last sharp observation: lands where clickbait titles would usually camp. Parthia beat Rome when it forced Rome to play Parthia's game, not Rome's. It won by disrupting supply with mobility, draining invasions with scorched plains and river barriers, and letting climate and distance do heavy lifting. It lost when fragmentation invited a southern rival, playing a statecraft game Parthia did not perfect in time. Centralization under a single ideological canopy. Both moves belong to the same chessboard. In the long run, history favors the empire with better paperwork when the cavalry skill is equal. So, the rise and fall condense to a clean arc. A nomad-born elite ambushes a crumbling Hellenistic frontier, marinates in Persia's older imperial memory, grabs Mesopotamia, and then survives Rome at its most aggressive. It administers a hybrid culture with Greek scribes, Aramaic accountants, and Iranian nobles, rides composite bows across 2 centuries of warfare, and mediates between China and Rome for 500 years. Then a new Persian dynasty arrives with priests and walls of text, advertises itself as a reboot, and keeps the capital on the Tigris because locations like rivers care only about gravity. The Parthians fade as a sovereign court, but remain as a class, a style, and a punching lesson for overconfident invaders. A sunbeam on bronze-scale armor, a bow drawn back over a gallop, and a recumbent archer stamped on 1,000 coins. These endure longer than the diadem that started it. And now, let's continue with our next story. Day in the life of a life as a blacksmith. You start the morning under a lie. Not your lie. A society-sized one with 20 bellows and golden robot assistants. Homer's Hephaestus shows off in Iliad 18, the god with automated tripods and a glowing mountain of a workshop. Your day begins under that legend, and then right inside its contradiction. No mountain, no robots, just you. A low roof blackened by smoke, 2 leather bellows that wheeze like old goats, and the immediate need for heat. You live inside a craft the Greeks called by an older name than iron itself, chalkeus, worker in bronze. The word stuck even when iron took over. And here you are in the 5th century Bas, in a small smithy off the Athenian agora, where excavations actually turned up tuyères, slag, and hearths on the southwest side. The Hephaestion, that Doric temple of Hephaestus and Athena Ergane, that everyone mislabels the Phaeanian, looks down at you from Kolonos Agoreos, its construction running roughly 415 B. It's a nice stone complement to your blackened shop. Athens carves a marble thank you note to crafts, while crafts like yours cough out the iron that keeps marble in place. The air outside is coldish, the light pre-sunrise bluish, and charcoal waits in a clay-lined forge like a promise you can afford to break. The charcoal came here in sacks from the hills, burned in pits by men who work unseen, trading hard labor for harder coins. 10 units of wood become 1 of charcoal, more or less, and on a heavy day your hearth eats armfuls. You set the tuyere, fired clay, thumb-thick, fragile, and pack charcoal around it with fingers that have their own geography of scars. 1 spark, then a breath, then both bellows work under the elbows of your apprentice, or your own rhythm, and the forge turns from black to smoulder to a tight, serious orange. There is no thermometer. You read color. You read sound. Real iron whispers different notes at different heats. The wrong note means a crack, like a snapped oath. Your iron isn't melted. That's the first everyday heresy against movie logic. Bloomery iron in this world refuses to become a puddle. It softens, glows, and resists. You coax it into shape at heats between dull red and high orange. Around the territory modern people jot down as 800, 1100 degrees Celsius, while you and your ancestors mark by sight. Bronze casters pour. Blacksmiths persuade. Today's first persuasion is agricultural. Ploughs in Greece are mostly wood, the yard scratching shallow furrows that still feed cities and feed armies, and Greek farmers upgrade them with iron where wood fails. You hook the first billet from the coal bed with long iron tongs. Place it on the anvil. Hakmon, the same Greek root Homer used when he described anvils fawning off Olympus. And your hammer rings into the morning. Hammer, flip, strike. Your neighbors know when you're working by these hits. They carry through swaths of the agora like temple bells. With blisters, the billeted bar stretches under those strikes. You upset one end, spread the nose. A plough point, a share cap, the business edge that meets Attic earth. You give it a wedge shape, draw back the heel to a taper that can be lashed onto the wooden body. This is not heroic work. It is survival work. Xenophon's O Economicus, written not far from your time, organizes a household around unglamorous needs like this. Barley planted, vines pruned, tools mended. An economy is a list, not a trophy. The hammer tells your elbow when to stop. You pass the new point back into heat, turn to the water trough, then to the forge again. Quench happens at the right time, not the fastest. Greek smiths know water will harden the outer skin of high-carbon iron quickly, but water also breaks if the iron's wrong. Aristotle later writes about hardening iron by plunging it into cold water, and marvels at waters that do it better or worse. He's theorizing in the 4th century. You're judging by hiss and feel. No one writes plays about the scale that forms on iron and flakes off as dull snow. It coats your arms. You wipe your forearm and leave streaks on your chiton. Smithy fashion trends, soot black, ash grey, and the occasional burn hole shaped like a small confession. A runner from a stone yard pauses near your doorway before light fully fills the street. No words required, Stonework all over Athens needs iron to hold stone to stone. Clamps and dowels, hammered into precision slots, and then bedded in molten lead. Archaeologists call them cramps, and thousands of them bind temples and stowers you can point to. The Parthenon's marble blocks were fixed with iron cramps sealed in poured lead to keep out water and prevent rust, the lead also spreading loads. The Erechtheian building accounts on the Acropolis. List iron, purchased by the minna, with 1 minna standing around 436 grams. Inscriptions like Igai give lines for iron, another for lead, another for lead, another for wages. Every glorious metope relies on fasteners that look like oversized staples you can shape from straight bar. So you shape them. Measure by knuckle. Strike flat ends for the tails. Bend the U-leg cold over the hornless end of the anvil. While the center glows, you anneal to take spring out if the iron resists your geometry. You picture the tailoring of marble. The channels cut to receive these clamps. A mason lifting a ladle of molten lead. On site, pouring protection around your iron. It means lead, heated down the street, which means shiny fumes, which means headaches, stewing into generations. No one talks medicine to you. The Hippocratic writers mention trades and ailments, but the day demands deliverables, not diagnoses. You bank a new piece into heat. Bronze and iron share space on your benches. The bronze men in the city, true foundry workers, do their casting with wax, clay molds, and furnaces hot enough to pour. There's a famous cup painted around 480 betch, the so-called foundry cup, that shows just that world. Workers hauling a bronze figure for finishing, bellows huffing at a glowing kiln. As men hammer, your work overlaps at the edges. You don't pour bronze statues 12 feet high. You do make the chisels for the sculptors who chase them and the clamps that hold them. You glance at your tools, old friends with Athenian names and Near Eastern cousins. The hammer, sphaira, faces you with a slightly crowned face and a peen narrow enough to draw out iron. The tongs look like a family of birds that evolve to grip every shape you put on the fire. The anvil is not medieval castle weight. It's a practical hunk of iron with flat planes riveted into a thick wooden stump. There is the fuller you forged from a bar and stuck upright so you can put in grooves. There's a hardy hole. Not likely. You have stakes set into your bench. Your bellows, stitched leather with wooden handles, sit like patient lungs. Greek vases show 2 men sometimes working one forge, one on the bellows, one on the hammer. Your team changes with the size of the job and your household. Many craftsmen here own slaves. Some are metics, some are citizens. Plato drops a line in the Republic about Cephalus, a metic shield maker who kept 120 slaves busy in a factory. That's a scale stop, you notice. Every time philosophers perform numbers, your shop lives closer to 1 or 2 helpers. Most days, the only census you need is this: 2 arms that swing and 2 lungs that sigh. Your trade's social status fits awkwardly between contempt and dependence. Hephaestus exactly embodies that paradox. Layman laughingstock in some Greek stories, patron of indispensable work in others, god of the smoky corner. You smile a little when you think about his temple looming perfect, up above and the soot on your forearms. Athena again, Athena the worker, shares that temple. The city's literal goddess of craft leaves olives stamped into amphorae, wise owls on coins, and a wordless expectation that her people build. Your first break folds in around mid-morning. Bread made from barley, stiff and slightly sour. Olives, a piece of salted fish, if yesterday paid well. Wine cut with water in the standard civilized ratio. 3-1 or 2-1, because undiluted wine is for Thracians in jokes and for trouble. You refill the water skin at the fountain house, the Anachronos, 9 spouts, built under the Pisistratids in the 6th century and rebuilt again, a civic guarantee you can rely on the way the city's power relies on silver. And rowers, the Larian mines 40 or so kilometers to the southeast, pump out that silver. A tetradrachm of Athens, the iconic owl, weighs around 17.2 grams of nearly pure silver, and it rules markets across the Aegean. Your typical day rate as a skilled worker sits at about 1 drachma, 6 obols, which means that 1 owl coin equals roughly 4 days of your labor in the mid-5th century Bash. Those numbers breathe out of inscriptions on building accounts and payroll tallies. They're not abstract. They buy olives and wood and make your sweat convert into someone else's marble. You slide an obol, a tiny tongue-sized sliver of silver, into a clay jug where you keep change. Copper and bronze bits move too, but Athens likes its silver clean. Stamped owls spill through the agora in little payments and larger ones, a mercury river turned to coin form by slaves in Laurian tunnels, boys and men, underground trading their lungs for your page of history. The next billet in the forge is weapon-shaped, and here comes the part of your life the storytellers, generals, and reenactors love. Spears and swords are glamorous objects. The spear is the honest king of them in this city. A hoplite spear point is iron, often leaf-shaped with a strong midrib. A good one sits around 20 to 30 centimeters of blade, with a socket that slides over the ash shaft. You begin the spear as you begin so many things. A bar in orange heat, hammer pushing metal where geometry dictates. You mark the blade's shoulders, set them with a lighter hammer, and begin drawing a midrib to keep the blade stiff. You roll a paper's worth of iron into a cone for the socket around a mandrel, the tapered iron pillar you made for this job, and close the seam with precise hammering. Some sockets you weld shut with a forge weld. Clean, flux with sand or glass if you use it, clamp, and hit at a welding heat until the two faces kiss and stay. Sand and glass melt low. The ancients know it flows between seams to float out scale. The wedge of novelty, many centuries later, will bring in lime fluxes. Right now, silica is your friend when you can get it. The spear's work is in its balance and its edge. You finish the blade, quench as needed, bring the temper back just a hair by setting it near the fire after a hard quench to keep it from snapping brittle. You know the trick without a formula, because broken spearheads, like split joints, never let you forget. You hand file the edges to finish, because files leave order where the hammer left enthusiasm. The finished point will meet wood from Mount Pelion or Macedon someday, but that happens at another stall. You keep a rack of points in the shade. They look like grey leaves, made for a different kind of harvest. The hoplite's backup, his short sword, the Xiphos, crosses your anvil less than the movies promise. Spears dominate in Greek combat. Xiphos blades run something like 45-60 centimeters. Double-edged, the sort of cut and thrust tool that ends messy business up close. You make them when paid to make them. The future writes about Spartan sword myths. The present you live in writes orders for sickles, knives, axes, and endless nails. It also writes orders for armor fittings and bronze edges. Bronze remains for helmets and cuirasses, even in the Iron Age, a material inertia born of comfort and casting ease. Iron takes edges and tool lives. Bronze takes shapes and shines. The two together keep craftsmen, like you, packing both worlds. Your forge hearth runs on renown and oxygen. The bellows slap open and shut in a rhythm that feels human enough to count as a metronome. Your fullers put grooves where anvil faces won't. You pull the next job, a set of carving chisels for a stoneworker, iron for the body with a steel-hard edge if you can coax a higher carbon bite. Early Greek steel sits on the edge of your world. The chalybes of the Pontic coast are a byword for ironworking. Xenophon ran past them in the Anabasis around 400 B. Greeks know you can harden iron into what later generations will call steel by infusing carbon. Some tools in Greek graves show case-hardened skins. Microstructure studies centuries later under microscopes prove the steel edge theory. Your hands already practice. You heat a chisel, pack the tip in crushed charcoal in a clay sleeve, bake it long, and quench. It's a small ritual of patience. That skin, thin as a fingernail, carries more carbon, and the tool chip sings different when it bites stone. You bathe a set of tongs in the slack tub to cool them after a repair, and headaches hum around your temples. The shop breathes a stew of charcoal smoke, hot iron, and something like world history condensed into grit. There are no earplugs. Hearing loss accretes. There are no gloves. Your hands calibrate to temperatures on instinct. A parallel world of cloth and leather sits on a hook. Aprons to keep the worst off. Braces to block quick licks of orange. Hephaestus in art often sits bare-chested or in a cap with a short tunic, a sculptor's ideal of craft, untouched by insurance premiums. Your skin knows how that looks. On a real Wednesday, Athens around you beats like a 3,000-year-old heart. The agora's colonnades fill with buyers and sellers. Philosophers collect students. Politicians collect votes. Priests collect sacrifices. You collect iron scraps in a bucket for a different kind of recycling. Bloomery iron comes out of the furnace originally as a sponge-like bloom full of slag, black glassy impurities, and hammering squeezes it out. You have a mini version of that bloomery logic on your anvil every day. Iron becomes better with beating. Another nice metaphor society prefers in poetry while letting your wrists do the work. You rebuild the tuyere after it cracks. Clay and heat hate each other, but the world hasn't invented a better nozzle. Your clay comes mixed with straw and sand, shaped by your palms, dried by the same sun that bakes bread on roofs in July. The tuyere angle matters. Too much air and your charcoal eats itself. Too little and the heart stays sullen. You find the angle and the distance by habit as much as measurement. A few centimeters this way, a few that. There's no uniform. There's only craft. Midday flares big and white. Athens light in summer has a habit of flattening everything, like a cosmic anvil. Your lunch comes with that light. You cut more bread, chew with the bright appetite that physical work earns, and lighten the humor inside your own skull with a thought about the day's end. Deipnon will mean a fuller meal. Lentils maybe, garlic, a bit of cheese if fortunes swirl right. Greek cooking is honest food, made edible with olive oil and herbs. Your wine will pair with victory over tasks, watered to taste civilized again at a table under a fig tree if you can grab shade. Then the afternoon turns into a flow exercise. Hinges for doors, bracket for a shelf, iron rings for amphora, handles. Every piece moves along a sequence. Your hands hold like a song. Heat, strike, reheat, strike, cool, finish. You keep a basket of nails going because nails disappear like winter sunlight. Your nail rods cut with a chisel against the edge of the anvil. One end pointed, the other flattened, shanked, smooth. A long line of nails grows in a row on the bench, like soldiers who saw more roofs than battles. The stonemason's clamps cool by your right knee. You stamp your mark into the iron with a small punch on some jobs, invisible once set into marble, visible only to archaeologists later, who will curl with joy over your tiny signature. You don't stamp divine faces, only kings and cities stamp coin. You stamp the proof that you were here, in a world where most lives vanish into dust without footnotes. A boy passes with a basket of figs and a handful of obels from a carpenter. Barter bleeds into coin and back again. The city counts silver, but people count favors. You take the figs and the coin, more for the signal than the calories. The coin clinks and slides, owl side down. Athena's staring eye looks back at you from other pieces. One side goddess, one side bird. Victory wings implied because the mint's quality is trusted across seas. Forgery exists, sure, but the Athenian owls get minted on thick flans by men who hit dies all day. Your dies are hammers and files. Your stamp is your life. The forge slides you into another metal mood. You repair a kitchen knife, something in the 10 to 20 centimeter blade class, used for anything from slicing figs to cutting meat. Bronze handles can dress these. Iron tangs sit well in wood or bone. You reset a rivet. You explain nothing to anyone, because explanation here is the work. Edges that cut are the argument. Outside, the city handles politics like a sport. The Peloponnesian War hums across the horizon. After 431 by, rowers in the Athenian fleet earn a drachma a day by the Archidamian phase, and their oars beat into enemy waters, because smiths like you keep tools sharp for farmers, who grow grain, who feed rowers and citizens, who vote toward decisions that send more rowers out. Pericles makes speeches with words as hammered as your nails. The city throws stone in the name of gods and strategy. You keep its less poetic necessities shaped. Your craft ties to cult. Hephaestus doesn't get the fancy festivals that Dionysus, Apollo, or Athena hoard, but there's that temple. There are small votive offerings, asking for luck or giving thanks. Terracotta, bronze mini-tools, inscribed names left in sanctuaries have turned up, in numbers that prove a pattern. The gods accept miniature hammers, as you accept coins, as signs. You have left a little twisted iron scrap at a shrine once, a wordless prayer shaped like an unrolled snake. It felt honest. You don't spend much time explaining that either. Not far away in time, Theophrastus will write on stones and explain minerals and metals with a naturalist's ear. He will put language to what you have been living this entire time. Ores are not born equal. Heat matters, quenching changes reality. Pliny the Elder, a Roman centuries later, will go on about waters that harden steel differently, naming peoples and streams and mixing science with stories. Meanwhile, your life shows the lab working on every orange heat. Experiment happens at the end of your tongs. You pull a bar to shape a gouge for a woodworker. Ash shavings and marble dust are both your comrades because you arm the people who coax both. Chisels for marble come in shapes, point, tooth, flat. Wood wants sweeps and V's. Iron adjusts. Your anvil bruises bloom as decorative memory. The forge makes sounds that modern people imagine as angry. The truth feels more complicated. It's a heartbeat, an old language with 4 or 5 words repeated until they teach you new meanings. There are beats you know mean weld held. There are beats that mean the seam sighed and pulled apart. A crackle in the forge means charcoal shifting. A deeper cough means you raked it wrong and starved the fire. The shop hums with the kind of attentiveness that stays alive under a low ceiling. Toward late afternoon, a neighbourly hand drops a piece of broken iron in your door. A clamp torn free of a threshold, bent open like a fish's mouth. Repairing old iron is a moral good. In a world with no scrap yards, you heat it, flatten it, reforge the corners, put the U back where the U belongs. Iron forgives if you bring it through its heats without tearing its heart. The slag inside moves out like old grudges under new pressure. When it remembers its shape, you smile, because that kind of reconciliation pays off twice. Once in coin, once in craft, your thoughts wander where hands do not. The myth of special Spartan steel floats through Greek air like an early version of an ad. Laconian iron gets praise in some texts centuries later. Sparta's iron currency story, Plutarchic, late, theatrical, turns iron into a morality play about simplicity. Real steel in Greece does not come stamped with a single city's name. It comes from people like the Chalybes, from carburizing edges in small hearths, from men and women understanding that heat, carbon, and quench make tools bite. Even Herodotus' world grew on nails, not legends. You produce more spearheads than swords, more plough bits than spearheads, and your city survives on that math. You finish a batch of long cramps for stone and lay them in a row to cool, each arm around the length of your forearm. The line looks like a flock resting. You notice the small differences between each handmade variants that will sit hidden under lead. The lead matters. It keeps water off the iron, spreads strain, and has the decency to melt at a civilized temperature around 327 degrees Celsius, compared to iron's refusal to melt at any your hearth achieves. Masons pour that lead on sight into the stone's carved channels, and the sound it makes when it hits your iron down in that groove is one of the odder civilizational noises, a wet hiss inside stone. That noise and your hammer built the city with as much decisiveness as any general. You sketch in your head the reach of your trade. Islands dot the Saronic Gulf, and beyond full of potters and shipwrights who need your clamps and nails. Corinth sends bronze, like a force of nature. Euboea brings timber. Aegina once minted its own turtles. Coins with a sea creature on one face, with the kind of economic swagger that makes headaches for everyone on land until alliances decide otherwise. Your day writes receipts in iron. Your customers write the rest in speeches. The sky turns slowly from iron grey to copper. Dusk in Athens comes like the perfect part in a long song. You bank the fire just enough to keep a heart alive for tomorrow. Charcoal left with a small blanket of ash will catch quicker than one born from nothing. You lay tools back onto their places. The tongs go in a row. Hammers stack near the stump. The fuller goes back into a hole in the bench. A brush lies across the anvil face to keep tiny grit from denting your next job. You fill the slack tub and toss quench water onto the dirt floor in a dark river that makes dust into mud and calms the threat of an ember, making mischief. Fire watches are an Athens thing. Houses and shops sit elbow close. Suit speaks in the language of risk management every evening. Your body carries the day in all the obvious ways. Shoulders warm, legs steady, a burn on the back of your left thumb that you will remember every time you reach into a sleeve tonight. A carpenter comes by for clamps. You weigh them in your hands. Weigh his in return as coins clatter into your palm. The math checks. 6 obols for heavy work, 4 for quick pieces. A drachma for a week's worth to be delivered. A promise of more when the next tranche of building funds flows from the city's purse. Inscriptions that will be set in stone. count out both stone and silver in a precision that modern auditors salute. Your place sits between lines in the ledger that read, for lead, for iron, for carpenters, for stonecutters. There's a certain pleasure in being named. You lock nothing. The shop closes by habit and neighbors' eyes. You sling a satchel over your shoulder that smells like smoke because it always smells like smoke, and you climb the slight path that climbs past the heft-faced iron because this is your daily idea of respect. The temple's proportions come out of the stone like certainty. 5 by 13 columns, flutes and triglyphs like ribs and breath. The friezes show mythical labors of Theseus and Heracles, while your own labors squat in your arms. You stand in the shadow and consider dropping a small, twisted nail into a corner crack as a private votive. People have done worse with their spare metal. Consideration turns into action. The nail slides into a niche, and you walk away without pointing at your own gesture. Gratitude doesn't require witnesses. Back down toward the agora, twilight soaks into the city. Oil lamps prick into heat in windows and under porch beams. Men return from assembly, prisoners from court, market sellers from stalls. You pass a stoa where voices run like water. You pass a wrestling school with boys sluicing dust with oil. Every trade marks the evening with low theatres of habit. You belong to the one whose props glow orange, and then die into grey, and then reappear every morning out of something like nothing. Your house holds a meal and a body that has been promised a rest. You wash your hands in a basin, grit running down your forearms and pooling at your wrists. Hoarded heat bleeds away. Deepnon shares bread. Difnon shares bread. Lentils stewed to a humble perfection. A small dish of garum imported, not common, mostly olive and salt. Cheese a luxury. Your wine gets its bath of water again. Athens stays civilized at table. Conversation near you threads together. City life. You listen because a smith who listens knows who builds what next. A new stoa means orders. A new ship means nails. A wedding means hinges. A death means strigils and knives for the butcher. But strigils are bronze, and you send him to your neighbor. Division of labor isn't theory here. It's practical mercy. A long, slow moment arrives in the doorway while you lean against the jamb and watch the street. The moon, if the month's right, is a silver coin pinned in place by some god better with tongs than you. You think about the oddness of touching something so hard and making it move. Metal doesn't want your plans. You earn every angle. The city breathes down again. Torches on the Acropolis show watchmen or workers. The Erechtheians' strange, sacred complexity still rises there. Its caryatids feeling their fate, already in the plans of men who cannot imagine them being stolen by a Voltairean baroness centuries later. The accounts for that temple, still in progress, list out iron by the mina, wages by the drachma, marble by draft animal. Your work lives in those lines, even if it lives hidden inside stone. A scholar in a future century will read igai.cos and pointed for iron, X minus, Y drachmas, and your ghost will nod. You also think, because you earn the right to a thought that is not an instruction, about how myths and the market fit like two sides of a coin. Hephaestus in Homer's song had 20 bellows. You have 2. He had golden tripods that moved on their own. You move your own feet. He laughed at being limped and landing back on Olympus. You laugh at a well-set weld. He made Achilles a shield with a world laid out on it. Cities, dancers, harvesters, murders, weddings, all in bronze. You make Athens stay up. The differences matter. The continuum matters more. Evening wraps your day with habit. You check your coins again. Under lamplight, the owl's eye catching the flame. You stack them in a jar because money isn't salary here. It's potential turned to metal. It buys charcoal. It buys more iron. It pays a helper, perhaps a slave whose life you own. And that fact sits with a quiet moral weight you learned not to name out loud, because this city builds itself on that unpaid work as surely as the Lorien does. You shake your hands once, two tight flaps that fling pain into the air like water out of a pool. The skin will crack by winter and thicken by spring. Craft hardens the person as surely as it hardens the steel. Bed comes like a treaty. Your body remembers each strike the way a tree rings. Remember winters. The city goes on while you drop into the dark. Someone out there speaks of Socrates. Someone else counts triremes. Someone positions a marble block so perfect angels would weep in another religion. You go the other direction. You go to sleep because morning's list is already writing itself in the back of your skull. Tomorrow looks like this one in most fundamentals. That's not a failure. That's the way the city stands upright. You will light charcoal. You will listen to bellows. You will make plow points that slide into soil, and nails that slide into wood, and clamps that slide into stone, and spearheads that go wherever the city sends them. You will bring soft iron into a hard economy and make it live the life you need it to. The myth shines down with 20 bellows and an immortal smile. The truth bellows twice, and then 3 times, and then stares at you with a glow you made with your own arms. Every great day in Athens turns into that kind of ordinary courage. A last detail tucks itself in like a blanket corner. The shop floor tomorrow will show chalk marks from your boot soles and a sprinkling of black glass from slag you chased out of iron with better patience than its ancestors. Your anvil face will show faint crescents where you missed the exact line. You'll brush it again with care. You will lay tongs where they always go, because ritual is not only for gods. In the agora, someone tomorrow will trade a fig for an obol. In the shipyard, a carpenter will reach for a nail and find your work in his palm. On the Acropolis, a mason will pour lead around your clamp and step back from the stone, trusting the city not to move under him. That mason will never see your face. You will never see his. The handshake happens through iron. It holds. That's the craft. And just before sleep, erases the forge's orange from the back of your eyes. A late thought slides in with a blacksmith's particular dry smile. Modern people tell stories about thunderbolts and super swords. You stand by a better legend, humble and weirder. 1,000 invisible U-shaped irons, set into marble, poured around with soft grey lead, holding gods on roofs while Athens changes its mind about everything else. That's the real magic trick. Not sparks, not bellows, blessed by Apollo. Just heat, iron, patience, and the small, stubborn joy of making a city stand still long enough to call it civilization. Sources later will list it in fragments. Vases with men bent to anvils, inscriptions, counting minas of iron, Aristotle explaining quenching, Xenophon naming household tools, Strabo naming the chalybes, the agora's archaeologists mapping slag with grids. You write the rest with a hammer. Then finally, after the longest day you cried into shape, you go quiet, and the forge goes quiet with you. The ember under ash holds a sleeping red, a core of tomorrow's heat smouldering in the gloom. It lies there like a heartbeat. So do you.